Chapter 264. The experts from the Watermoon Mountain Villa didn't speak ill of the Li clan's three brothers. After all, the Li clan's three brothers were invited by them. Even if it was just for the sake of face, they wouldn't go overboard. Not only that, the star-seizing manor was the one to be the villain, why would they want to offend them? Grandmaster Li, what do you think? The experts from the Watermoon Mountain Villa turned to the Li clan's three brothers. Old First Li spoke. From what I can see, the divine inscriptions seem to want to soar upwards. Little brother Qin's perception is stronger, he would definitely be able to see things more clearly than me. Hence, he chose to suppress the divine inscriptions and advanced at an extremely fast speed. Evidently, he understood that they wouldn't be able to suppress the divine inscriptions with their strength. The Li clan's three brothers had extremely high attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions. Their deductions were not far from the truth. Qin Wenyan also knew that with him taking the lead, the other grandmasters would be able to see through the divine inscriptions. However, with the attitude of the star-seizing manor earlier, no one warned them. Even the three brothers from the Li clan chose to keep their mouths shut. What did the life and death of the star-seizing manor have to do with them? Grandmaster Li, do you have a suitable path in mind? The experts from the Watermoon Mountain Villa asked. I will choose carefully. Everyone from the demon cult, let's go together. The more people there are, the more strength there is. We will be able to lessen the burden and suppress the divine inscriptionists. Old Li glanced at the experts from the demon cult. At the same time, Zhao Lai spoke to the divine inscriptionists from the Skyember sect. Grandmasters, Zhao Lai, was disrespectful earlier. I hope you won't take offense. As long as you can lead us safely through, Zhao will definitely reward you. The divine inscriptionists didn't say anything. They knew that Zhao Lai was forced by the circumstances, but how could they say no? Even if Zhao Lai was extremely tyrannical and killed one of their divine inscriptionists, Zhao Lai wouldn't spare them even if they said no. Not only that, it was impossible for them to shake off the Skyember sect. With Qin Wendian taking the lead, the others all followed suit. With the divine inscriptionists in the middle leading the way, the experts on the left and right flanks of the divine inscriptionist grandmaster, all of them stepped into the spatial gate that was filled with killing intent. Of course, even though they had managed to do so, they had still suffered heavy losses. Not a single force had managed to escape unscathed. More than 200 people from the four forces had come to this trial ground, but in this space alone, a total of 80 people had died. It could be said to be terrifying. Ever since the discovery of the refinement grounds of divine inscriptions, this was the first time that they had encountered such a great opportunity. But at the same time, it was also the most dangerous. If they were not careful, they might lose their lives. This caused the hearts of the survivors to feel heavy, and they didn't dare to be careless. When Qin Wenyan stepped through the door, he was surprised to find that the pine trees, the ancient peaks, the hall, and the statues were still in front of him. He could see them, but he couldn't touch them. There was no one around him. Not a single person. Bailu Jing, Bailu Yi, as well as those from the White Deer Institute, all vanished from his sight. That door gives off a feeling of spatial disorder. It's a spatial formation. The moment Qin Wenyan stepped through the door, he clearly sensed a wisp of spatial energy. Spatial divine inscriptions, Qin Wenyan had seen them before in the secret manual Bailu Yi had given him. Spatial divine inscriptions, they contain the power of spatial laws. His heart pounded wildly. In front of him, a vast expanse of space appeared. There were mountains, rivers, and lakes. Qin Wenyan understood that he was currently in the middle of a spatial formation. Not only him, but everyone who passed through the door would also be trapped within this formation. Inclining his head, he stared at the void. That statue was still there, hovering in the air. It was as though no matter where they went, this earth-suppressing statue would always be there, preventing them from flying. This distance seems so close, but how far is it? Qin Wenyan's gaze shifted to the pine trees and ancient peaks in front of him, as a sense of longing appeared in his heart. From this dangerous setup, one could see how terrifying the strength of the ascendant was. He even knew how to use spatial formations. The power of spatial divine inscriptions was definitely a rare treasure. Not only that, Could it be that the Ascendant had left behind this trial ground for no reason? There was a high possibility that the Ascendant had left behind an inheritance here and was choosing a successor for himself. Stepping out, Qin Wenyan advanced forward. However, before he could even take 100 steps, he halted again. After which, with a flick of his finger, a beam of astral light slammed into the ground in front of him. Instantly, a thunderous rumbling sound echoed out as a terrifying destructive sword light tore through space, vanishing from sight. Only then did Qin Wenyan continue forward. On the way, he encountered many dangers. Some of the traps directly blocked his path, and if he didn't dispel them, he wouldn't be able to advance any further. This made Qin Wenyan understand that if he wanted to pass this trial, he either had to have an extremely high level of attainment in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, or he had to be extremely powerful. But of course, if he had both, he would definitely be the successor that the Ascendant wanted to see the most. The traps are getting stronger and stronger. They're already strong enough to kill peak-level Yuanfu experts. Qin Wenyan sat on a hillside, his entire body enveloped by powerful divine inscriptions. Only after the traps were destroyed did he stand up and continue forward. He couldn't help but to sigh in his heart. Even with his attainment in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, he still had to proceed with caution, not daring to be the slightest bit careless. Qin Wenyan relied on his high level of attainment in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions to advance. Finally, at this moment, he saw a silhouette not far away from him. This person was a middle-aged man clad in the robes of the Hua clan. His eyes were sinister, and when he stared at Qin Wenyan, it caused Qin Wenyan to feel a chill run down his spine. Grandmaster Qin. This person had already noticed Qin Wenyan earlier, and upon seeing Qin Wenyan, he immediately rushed over. After which, he smiled. Grandmaster Qin, can we travel together? Someone from the Hua clan. Qin Wenyan glanced at the long robes the middle-aged man was wearing. His countenance didn't change as he lightly nodded his head. Sure. In that case, please. The middle-aged man smiled. Qin Wenyan glanced at the middle-aged man as he smiled. Senior's strength is higher than mine. Please move first. If there's any danger, I will naturally warn Senior. Grandmaster Qin is too polite. Given Grandmaster Qin's attainments in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, how can a commoner like me be compared to you? I humbly request Grandmaster Qin to lead the way. The middle-aged man was extremely polite, as though he had something good to share with Qin Wenyan. Since this is the case, I will move first. If there's anything I need Senior's help with, I hope Senior won't take offense. Qin Wenyan's tone was similarly polite. Sure. The middle-aged man nodded. That's only natural. Qin Wenyan didn't say anything else, and continued on his way. Right now, these people all treated divine inscriptionists as treasures. Since this middle-aged man from the Hua clan encountered Qin Wenyan, how could he let him off? Qin Wenyan decisively agreed because he knew that even if he didn't want to, he had no choice but to agree. He could see that the clothes of this middle-aged man from the Hua clan were torn and tattered. Evidently, the journey here wasn't easy. How could Qin Wenyan spare him? The two of them continued on their way, and in the blink of an eye, over 10 days passed. The pine trees and ancient peaks were still the same, and the statues in the Great Hall were eternal. Yet they continued on, as though there was no end to this path. Grandmaster, why did we travel such a long distance? Isn't this a waste of time? The middle-aged man spoke to Qin Wenyan. Senior, if you don't feel at ease, you can move first. Qin Wenyan casually replied. I'm just speaking casually. Grandmaster, please don't take offense. The middle-aged man laughed. In truth, during these 10 days, although Qin Wenyan would occasionally ask for his help, it was much easier than him moving alone. The dangers ahead were still unknown. How could he let Qin Wenyan go first? Most likely, the others would still be struggling to move forward in this formation. In fact, it was just as he had expected. Although the dangers in this formation were not as concentrated as before and were only concentrated in one area, this kind of never-ending danger was still impossible to guard against. Bai Lu-yi was currently in a precarious situation. She had encountered an expert from the star-seizing manor in the formation. Although Bai Lu Yi's attainment in the Tao of divine inscriptions couldn't be compared to Qin Wenyan, she was, after all, an extremely powerful divine inscriptionist. How could the expert from the star-seizing manor spare her? Senior, the traps ahead are getting more and more dangerous. I'm afraid that even if we work together, we won't be able to advance any further. Bai Lu Yi's countenance was somewhat haggard as she spoke to the black-robed old man. This old man didn't like to speak, exuding a gloomy aura. After hearing Bai Lu Yi's words, he didn't say anything. Instead, his eyes roamed over Bai Lu Yi's pure countenance, as well as her towering peaks, causing her countenance to turn even paler as she felt extremely embarrassed. Gritting her teeth, she could only brace herself and continue moving forward. The gray-robed old man stared at Bai Lu Yi's back. That voluptuous figure of hers was exceptionally alluring, and a nefarious fire flickered in his eyes. If one were to say that Bai Lu Yi's luck was bad, then Bai Fei's was even worse. She had accompanied Zhang Qin here, and because her master was Luo He, the people from the Pill Emperor Hall had always taken care of her. Who would have thought that she would be thrown into such a formation? Not only that she didn't encounter anyone from the Pill Emperor Hall, but instead, an expert from the Sky Ember sect. That person looked to be about 26 or 27 years of age, but his actual age was over 30. His eyes were filled with evil, and he wanted Bai Fei to lead the way for him. With Bai Fei's strength, how could she possibly lead the way? If it weren't for her good luck, she would have already died in the formation. But this young man was truly powerful, he would always save her every time. Along the way, Bai Fei's robes were tattered, her shoulders were exposed, and even her fair skin was exposed. Such a hazy beauty would cause evil thoughts to rise in the hearts of men. Miss Bai, why don't we find a better place to enjoy ourselves? That way, you won't die in this formation before you've even had the chance to enjoy a man. The young man laughed evilly, teasing Bai Fei. If he really wanted to do something to her, she wouldn't be able to stop him. But the young man obviously couldn't bear to part with such a precious stone. He knew what was more important, and so he didn't make a move on Bai Fei. But if things continued like this, Bai Fei knew that she would either die in the formation, or become his plaything. As for Zhang Qin, Zhao Lai, Hua Feng, Bai Lu Jing, Zhu Sha, and the other rankers on the heavenly fate rankings, they advanced at an extremely fast speed, destroying everything in their path. But even so, they were all in a sorry state, and there were a few times where they encountered danger. This formation was extremely difficult to deal with. Chapter 265. Qin Wendian and the middle-aged man continued advancing. Although this space was filled with danger, there would eventually be an end to it. At most, they would have to spend more time. If they met with danger that they had no confidence in, they would rather take a detour. And just as Qin Wendian took another detour, he saw a silhouette ahead of him. Involuntarily, Qin Wendian halted his steps. His silhouette flickered as he appeared beside the puppet. This puppet belonged to Bai Lu Yi. The puppet blinked at Qin Wendian, before pointing a finger in the distance, as though gesturing something. This caused Qin Wendian's eyes to narrow as he asked, "You're being held hostage?" The puppet nodded its head. Momentarily, Qin Wendian's heart tightened as he commanded, "Bring me there." Grandmaster Qin. Just as Qin Wendian was about to leave with the puppet, the middle-aged man walked up to him. "Grandmaster Qin, what's wrong? Let's continue on our way. Senior, I have a friend who encountered some difficulties. Why don't we go together? With Senior's strength, you might be able to help," Qin Wendian replied. However, the middle-aged man merely laughed. Did Qin Wendian treat him as a hired thug? For those who came here and hadn't died yet, it was highly likely that they weren't simple characters. Which one of them didn't originate from a transcendent power? Perhaps, they were all experts from a transcendent power like him. He didn't like this at all. "Grandmaster Qin, it's best if you don't meddle in other people's business." The middle-aged man laughed, causing Qin Wendian to finally furrow his brows. But at this moment, a raging wind gusted by. Qin Wendian's eyes flashed, only to see the middle-aged man instantly appearing in front of the puppet. A terrifying palm imprint slammed downwards, the terrifying might capable of crushing everything. crackling sounds rang out as Qin Wenyan saw that the puppet was directly smashed into smithereens, its remains scattered across the ground. Qin Wenyan's countenance abruptly changed, after which, the middle-aged man stared at him as his gaze turned sharp. "Grandmaster, since this is the case, you can lead the way with peace of mind." The Qin Wenyan right now was a naked threat. Not only that, he had even destroyed Bai Lu Yi's puppet. After pondering for a moment, Qin Wenyan nodded, then turned around and continued to walk forward. The middle-aged man's eyes flashed, and he quietly followed behind him, keeping a certain distance. He still remembered the painful lesson of the star-seizing manner. He could not give Qin Wenyan a chance to borrow the power of the divine inscriptions to deal with him. The middle-aged man became much more cautious. Not only did he follow closely behind Qin Wenyan, he even rejected Qin Wenyan's requests to decipher the divine inscriptions. He only stood behind and watched Qin Wenyan. Luckily, Qin Wenyan didn't lie to him. Every time, a divine inscription trap would appear. Grand formation. At this moment, Qin Wenyan halted his steps as he stared ahead. In front of him, there were two mountain peaks on both sides. The wide pathway seemed to be unobstructed, but Qin Wenyan could sense the aura of a grand formation. The middle-aged man abruptly waved his palm, blasting it towards Qin Wenyan. At the instant his attack landed on the ground, a hurricane of destruction abruptly manifested as terrifying currents of air flowed. This caused the middle-aged man to laugh. "Grandmaster is truly powerful. Since you can see through it, please break the formation. The exit shouldn't be too far away." As he spoke, a look of anticipation flashed in his eyes. He could faintly sense that the exit was getting closer and closer. "Senior, this grand formation is extremely powerful. If Senior doesn't act, I'm afraid it'll be extremely difficult to break it." Qin Wenyan frowned. "I believe in Grandmaster." The middle-aged man laughed, as he clasped his hands behind his back. "In that case, I'm afraid we'll have to delay for a little longer." Qin Wenyan stopped and started inscribing divine inscriptions. Numerous divine inscriptions appeared, as a faint pressure gushed forth. The middle-aged man stared at Qin Wenyan's every movement. With a flicker of his silhouette, he actually appeared in front of Qin Wenyan. A destructive wind circulated around his palms, as his palms turned into a fiery red. A terrifying aura enveloped Qin Wenyan, as though he could kill Qin Wenyan at any moment. Qin Wenyan didn't reply. He continued inscribing divine inscriptions in silence. After a period of time, he started to activate the divine inscriptions to attack the grand formation in front of him, advancing bit by bit. The middle-aged man followed closely behind him, only a step away from Qin Wenyan. He could kill Qin Wenyan with a single wave of his hand. "Senior, there's no need to be so cautious." Qin Wenyan laughed. After which, he turned his head and stared behind the middle-aged man as he coldly asked, "Who are you?" The middle-aged man saw Qin Wenyan's countenance changing, yet he didn't move. He merely laughed. "Grandmaster, it's best if you don't play any tricks." However, Qin Wenyan's countenance abruptly changed. He stomped on the ground as a terrifying sharpness gushed forth from behind the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's countenance drastically changed as he abruptly turned around. At the same time, his left hand stretched out, grabbing towards Qin Wenyan's head. Even if there really was someone, he had to capture Qin Wenyan. However, at the instant he turned his head, Qin Wenyan's body had already sunk into the ground. At the instant the divine inscriptions flowed, the ground Qin Wenyan was standing on instantly caved in. Qin Wenyan's body sank downwards as a terrifying sharp sword appeared in his hands, directly stabbing towards the middle-aged man. The moment the middle-aged man turned his head, he knew that he had been tricked. Indeed, as he had expected, there was no one here. However, another terrifying sword screen was exploding towards him. The flaming palms blasted out in a frenzy. He felt a sharp pain in his legs as he screamed in agony. Both of his legs were directly cut off by the sharp swords. The terrifying sword screen forced his body to retreat backwards, drifting over the top of Qin Wenyan's head. A terrifying suppressive force came from the void. His severed legs touched the ground as a destructive airflow began to wreak havoc. That was the matrix that Qin Wendian had yet to break. "Save me!" the middle-aged man screamed in agony. But at this moment, Qin Wendian had already sunk into the ground. He didn't dare to poke his head out. In order to kill the middle-aged man, he had also taken a great risk. If he had been a moment slower, the middle-aged man's attack would have blasted him into the matrix and he would have died. But if he didn't take such a risk, he wouldn't be able to kill the middle-aged man. He had no other choice. When everything calmed down, Qin Wendian emerged from the ground. He coldly glanced at the location where the middle-aged man had been. Not even his bones were left. Turning, Qin Wendian sped away, his eyes still flickering with a cold light. Not long after, Qin Wendian returned to the location where the puppet was destroyed. He believed that since Bai Lui had met him here, she should have known that he would find a way to wait for her here. Hence, Qin Wendian had prepared a grand divine inscription formation here, waiting for Bai Lui's arrival. However, what made Qin Wendian surprised was that Bai Fei had already arrived before Bai Lu. Not only that, she was in a sorry state. Behind her, there was a young man exuding a sinister aura. His robes were also covered with dust, and there were even a few injuries on his body. It was evident that he had suffered greatly. "It's him!" Upon seeing Qin Wendian, Bai Fei's eyes flickered. The sinister young man also noticed Qin Wendian, and he couldn't help but have an expression of interest on his face. "Let's go quickly," the sinister young man spoke to Bai Fei, and an instant later, he arrived in front of Qin Wendian. "Sir, why aren't you in a hurry?" The sinister young man smiled at Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian swept a glance at Bai Fei. At this moment, Bai Fei's clothes were barely covering her body, and many parts of her body were exposed. Below her fair shoulders, her ample bosom could be faintly seen, causing the hearts of men to be filled with lustful thoughts. Not only that, at this moment, she looked extremely haggard, as though she had been forced to do this. Bai Fei gritted her teeth as her countenance turned even more unsightly when she saw the look in Qin Wendian's eyes. "Hee, if you like it, I can give it to you. This might be the first time a beauty from the Pill Emperor Hall." The sinister young man laughed. Qin Wendian glanced at him as he replied, "I still have matters to attend to, please do as you please." The sinister young man continued smiling. It wasn't easy for him to meet such a powerful divine inscriptionist, and this divine inscriptionist seemed to be the strongest in the star-seizing manner. How could he bear to give up? "Sir, please follow me, I will definitely not mistreat you," the sinister young man continued. Bai Fei stared at Qin Wendian. "Have we met before?" At this moment, when she looked at Qin Wendian, although he was exuding a cold aura, the sense of familiarity grew stronger and stronger. She had definitely met this person before, but who was he? For a moment, Bai Fei couldn't think of anything, but she was sure that she definitely knew the person in front of her. Qin Wendian indifferently glanced at her, ignoring her. At this moment, the sound of footsteps drifted over from afar. Qin Wendian turned his gaze over, and his pupils involuntarily narrowed as he stared at the two silhouettes approaching. These two silhouettes were none other than Bai Lui and the black-robed old man from the star-seizing manor. When the black-robed old man saw Qin Wendian, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. It was actually him. He was someone from the star-seizing manor, but after witnessing Qin Wendian's performance during the exchange, in addition to the fact that the star-seizing manor had been harmed by Qin Wendian, a cold light flickered in his eyes. "Grandmaster Qin, what a scheme, causing my star-seizing manor to lose so many experts." The black-robed old man walked over, only to see a cold, killing intent flickering in Qin Wendian's eyes, so cold that the black-robed old man felt a chill run down his spine. Thinking of this, the black-robed old man coldly laughed as he walked to the back of Bai Lui. It seemed like this young man hated him to the core. "Grandmaster Qin?" An expression of contemplation appeared on Bai Fei's face. His surname was Qin, but she still couldn't think of anyone she knew who was a divine inscriptionist with the surname Qin. "Are you all right?" Qin Wendian asked. "How could I be all right after being held hostage for so many days?" Bai Lui glared at Qin Wendian, causing Qin Wendian to heave a sigh of relief. Since Bai Lui could still joke around with him, it meant that she hadn't encountered anything too bad. Release her and we'll forget about this matter, Qin Wenin coldly stated, staring at the black-robed old man. Hee, Qin Wenin, you overestimate yourself a little too much, the black-robed old man coldly replied. Qin Wenin? Bai Fei's mind shuddered as a silhouette appeared in her memories. The silhouette of the young man in front of her slowly overlapped with the image of the young man in front of her, causing her countenance to abruptly change. That's right, it was him. She only recognized him now. This divine inscriptionist was actually that young man from that small country. Chapter 266. The changes in Qin Wenin were too great. In just half a year's time, Bai Fei had almost failed to recognize him. Although she didn't have a deep impression of Qin Wenin back when she was in Chu, she had met him a few times and even had a direct conversation with him. Wu Xiu's memory was extremely good, and she couldn't recognize Qin Wenin. She could only say that Qin Wentian's changes were too great. She could still vaguely remember that Qin Wenin was once an impulsive young man, with hints of immaturity in him. There was also a faint trace of arrogance that belonged to the geniuses of a small country. Back then, she couldn't even be bothered with him. She had once told Qin Wenin not to have any fantasies about Mo Qingqing, but Bai Fei didn't expect that today, she would meet Qin Wenin here, under such circumstances. The youth back then had already shed his childishness and was even more devilishly handsome. His angular features were filled with a sense of calmness and indifference. At this moment, there was even a hint of coldness, causing people to feel a sense of fear. This was a different kind of aura, completely different from the faint arrogance he had back then. However, what shocked her the most was that the Qin Wenin of the past was already a peak-tier third-ranked divine inscriptionist. Not only that, he had also killed over 10 peak-tier Yuanfu cultivators from the star-seizing manor. Such a contrast caused Bai Fei to feel a sense of discomfort. That youth had actually come to the moon continent. Didn't he know that no matter how outstanding he was, there was still an insurmountable mountain in front of him? It's actually you. Bai Fei stared at Qin Wenin. Did you intentionally pretend not to know me? Qin Wenin swept a glance at Bai Fei as he coldly replied, Am I very familiar with you? Bai Fei's countenance stiffened as her chest heaved up and down. Her originally exposed fair skin caused the blood of those who saw it to boil. Emichim? The devilishly handsome young man silently watched on, feeling that things were getting interesting. Bai Fei and Qin Wenin were acquainted, and Qin Wenin seemed to have some grudges with her. Not only that, Bai Lu Yi from the star-seizing manor was someone Qin Wenin wanted to save. When the expert from the star-seizing manor saw Qin Wenin berating him, a cold light flickered in his eyes. What an impudent fellow. You probably don't understand the situation right now, do you? The black-robed elder suddenly waved his palm forward. The terrifying palm seemed to be able to pluck the stars and the moon as it grabbed at Qin Wenin. Don't hurt our friendship. The demonic young man took a step forward and struck out with his palm, immediately colliding with the palm print that was pouncing towards Qin Wenin, causing a loud explosion. What do you mean? The black-robed expert swept a cold glance at the demonic youth. We're all here for the sake of exiting this formation. Why must we fight and kill each other? The demonic young man laughed. Brother Qin, this place is fraught with danger, and you're able to help us out. After we exit this formation, I'll gift a beauty to Brother Qin. Isn't that perfect? Not only that, this friend from the star-seizing manor doesn't have a good temper. Although Brother Qin has high attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions, if you insist on doing things your own way, you'll be at a disadvantage. Bai Fei's countenance stiffened, her countenance incredibly ugly to behold. Gift her to Qin Wenin? Qin Wenin could naturally hear the faint threat in the words of the black-robed elder, yet he still coldly stated, I, Qin, have no way to trust you. Mph. The black-robed elder coldly snorted, placing his hand on Bai Lu Yi's shoulder. Do you have a choice? Brother Qin, Miss Bai Lu's beauty can cause the moon to blush and the flowers to blush. It's very easy for men to fall in love with her. The demonic youth laughed evilly. Momentarily, the black-robed elder also extended his hand and lightly patted Bai Lu Yi's shoulder, causing her countenance to turn pale. She took a few steps forward, only to see the black-robed elder coldly snorting, his hands still placed on her shoulder. "If you dare to make any more moves, I'll make sure you stay here forever." Qin Wenyin swept his gaze over to the black-robed elder. "The traps in the formation ahead are much more powerful, and no matter how strong you are, you won't be able to break them. I personally witnessed an expert from the Hua clan accidentally stumbling into one of the formations and dying. That's why I'm stopping here. But of course, if you wish to die, I won't stop you." The black-robed elder's hand froze, not daring to make any more moves. He smiled at Qin Wenyin. "In that case, you're willing to cooperate?" "Release her first," Qin Wenyin stated. "Hee, I'll take care of her safety. Just lead the way." How could the black-robed elder give up on capturing Bai Lui? Qin Wenyin furrowed his brows. "She's a girl, I don't trust you." "Huh, it seems like you have feelings for her," the black-robed elder laughed, before narrowing his eyes. "Since that's the case, I won't release her." Qin Wentian's countenance turned even colder. "Since that's the case, you can kill me and try to see if you can escape the formation ahead." Qin Wentian's eyes were filled with resolution, leaving no room for doubt. The black-robed elder furrowed his brows. He didn't expect Qin Wentian to be so crazy. It seemed like his feelings for Bai Lui were very deep. "Brother Qin, death won't solve the problem. Bai Lui is such a beauty. If she's defiled by this old man, how can you die in peace?" The demonic young man laughed evilly, causing the black-robed elder to join in as well. Both sides were unwilling to back down. And indeed, Qin Wentian's countenance turned incredibly unsightly. After a moment of silence, he stated, "I'll switch places with her. You guys can capture me and follow behind her. Both of us will be under your control." The eyes of the black-robed elder flickered, as he exchanged glances with the demonic young man. After which, both of them broke out into laughter. Qin Wentian's words seemed to be acceptable. "Come over here," the black-robed elder coldly laughed. Qin Wenyin glanced at the position the black-robed elder was standing in, before he stood up and walked towards him. Only when he reached his side did the black-robed elder release Bai Lui. Qin Wenyin placed both his hands on Bai Lui's shoulders. "Are you all right?" Bai Lui froze, as a hint of shyness flashed past her face. She didn't expect Qin Wentian to make such an intimate gesture. But in the next instant, she saw a sharp glint of light flickering in Qin Wentian's eyes. "How do you want to die?" Abruptly, a voice rang out from Qin Wentian's mouth. At the same time, he abruptly stomped on the ground, causing the black-robed old man to freeze. After which, a thunderous boom rang out as his body sank into the ground. The black-robed elder howled in rage as he soared up into the air. However, he could feel a terrifying suppressive force pressing down on him. It was easy to get down, but difficult to get up. He lifted his hands in anger and lunged out, only to see Qin Wenyin and Bai Lui stepping out. The air currents in this space became chaotic, and in an instant, it was impossible to see anything clearly. However, the terrifying sound of sword whistling could still be heard. Bai Fei was also stunned. After which, she only felt a palm imprint abruptly slamming into her, blasting her out of the formation. Falling to the ground, Bai Fei cursed in a low voice, "Bastard." But when she felt the turbulent air currents in front of her, her heart couldn't help but tremble. So it turned out that that fellow had long been prepared for this, and had set up overlapping divine inscriptions here. The black-robed elder howled madly as he felt an intense pain in his feet. Both his legs had been shattered by the divine inscriptions he had set up earlier. His countenance paled, and an instant later he saw a pair of ice-cold eyes staring at him, pointing a finger at him. Instantly, a boundless amount of sword light gushed towards him. Both his legs were sprawled on the ground, and he struggled to get up, but he was powerless to do so. "Spare me." A pleading expression flashed in the black-robed elder's eyes, but how could Qin Wenyin be polite? His sharp sword slashed out in a frenzy, and finally, the black-robed elder's body continued to sink downwards, as the divine inscriptions on the ground shattered his body. As for the demonic young man, at the instant Qin Wenyin made his move, he had already been trapped within the formation. This was an overlapping formation with a trapping formation, as well as a divine inscription of slaughter. Qin Wenyin had been waiting here all along, waiting for Bai Lu Yi's arrival. Who would have thought that the demonic young man and Bai Fei would arrive at the same time? The demonic young man's astral souls flickered, as a golden light enveloped him, helping him to defend against the incoming attacks. At the same time, he tried to break out of the formation, but he discovered that he was trapped within a maze, unable to escape. Finally, the demonic young man stopped, not daring to move recklessly. He wasn't proficient in divine inscriptions, and knew that it would be extremely difficult to escape. But he also understood that as long as he was careful, no matter how powerful the third-rank divine inscriptions were, they wouldn't be able to kill him. Hence, he chose to stop, not wanting to repeat the same mistake as the black-robed elder. The terrifying swords whistled through the air, yet the demonic young man merely waved his hands, as the light from his astral souls enveloped him. A golden body appeared in front of him, blocking the swords. Cracking sounds rang out unceasingly, but the golden body didn't shatter. "Brother Qin, since you can't kill me, why don't you let me go? From now on, we will have nothing to do with each other. How about it?" The voice of the demonic young man drifted out, and at this moment, Qin Wenyin and Bai Lu Yi appeared outside the formation. Qin Wentian's countenance was extremely cold. If he didn't kill this person, there would only be trouble in the future. In the formation he inscribed, the strongest killing intent was none other than the slaughter divine inscriptions embedded in the ground. Not only that, the position he was sitting at was precisely in front of the slaughter divine inscriptions. As long as someone walked in front of him, there was a high chance that they would be standing there. At the start, the demonic young man was the one standing there, but after the black-robed elder arrived, he inadvertently shifted his position, causing the black-robed elder to be the one standing there, holding Bai Lu in his arms as he faced Qin Wenyin. This had directly led to the death of the black-robed elder. But if the demonic young man merely relied on the peak-tier third-ranked divine inscriptions to kill him, it would be extremely difficult. Within the formation, the demonic young man's countenance flickered with a murderous light as a long golden spear appeared in his hands, emanating a terrifying aura of destruction. "Careful!" Qin Wenyin spoke. Abruptly, a terrifying beam of light shot forth from the formation as a beam of golden light shot out from the formation, shooting towards them. "Go!" Qin Wenyin commanded. His opponents had extremely powerful divine weapons, and it was only a matter of time before the formation collapsed. Qin Wenyin was extremely decisive. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to kill the demonic young man, he immediately pulled Bai Lu Yi away. Bai Fei's countenance stiffened, but she soon followed after Qin Wenyin. She was too weak in this formation, so she had no choice but to follow the others. Scram! Qin Wenyin abruptly turned his head, coldly glancing at Bai Fei. Bai Fei's countenance stiffened as she stared at Qin Wenyin. I, Qin, am a subordinate of Jackdaw. I'm not fit to be together with Miss Bai Fei." Qin Wenyin coldly spoke, causing Bai Fei's countenance to turn pale. In the past, how could she possibly look up to Qin Wenyin? But now, she had to follow behind Qin Wenyin as though she was begging for mercy. How could she not be treated coldly? Even now, in front of Qingqing, you are still a jackdaw. You're not fit to be together with her. How could Bai Fei endure Qin Wentian's attitude? She swept a glance at the two of them. "The two of you are quite compatible. Whether I'm compatible or not, it's not up to you to decide. You don't have the qualifications yet. Today, I saved your life because you and Qingqing are fellow disciples. As for me and Bai Lu Yi, tell Qingqing that I, Qin Wenyin, will definitely come to the Pill Emperor Hall to fetch her." After speaking, Qin Wenyin flicked his sleeves and departed, leaving Bai Fei dumbfounded. Chapter 267. After Qin Wenyin and Bai Lu Yi left, Bai Lu Yi's pure and innocent eyes stared fixedly at Qin Wenyin. At this moment, the coldness radiating from Qin Wenyin had already dissipated. Noticing Bai Lu Yi staring at him, he couldn't help but smile as he asked, "You like looking at me so much? Look at your arrogant face." Bai Lu Yi glared at him before shifting her gaze away. Eventually, she couldn't help but turn her gaze onto Qin Wenyin as she asked in a light voice, "Mo Qingqing, is she really your girlfriend?" Earlier, she had heard the conversation between Qin Wenyan and Bai Fei. Bai Fei was someone from the Pill Emperor Hall, and not only that, Qin Wenyan had personally said that he would go to the Pill Emperor Hall to fetch Mo Qingqing. Back then, when Qin Wenyan had mentioned Mo Qingqing to her, Bai Lu Yi had thought that he was just joking. Qin Wenyan shrugged. Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes brightened as she asked, "Can you tell me more about it? I'm very curious." "Even beauties like to gossip?" Qin Wenyan laughed. Mo Qingqing and I both come from a small country named Chu. That place is under the jurisdiction of the 9 Mystical Palace, and there's always some conflict between my clan and the royal clan. One time, I fainted in a forest, and Qingqing saved me. However, I didn't know that it was her who saved me. She only told me about it after I got to know her. Qin Wenyan recounted the past to Bai Lu Yi, as Bai Lu Yi listened attentively. Her beautiful eyes shone with a brilliant light as she listened attentively to the story. "You chopped off Hua Xiaoyun's arm?" Bai Lu Yi exclaimed in shock. If it wasn't for the fact that Luo He was there, the Hua clan wouldn't have spared me." Qin Wenyan nodded his head. "In that case, you came to the Moon Continent to look for Mo Qingqing?" Bai Lu Yi felt extremely moved in her heart. From a small country, Qin Wenyan had come all the way to the Moon Continent, one of the 9 continents of Grand Xia. She was very clear on how difficult it was to bring Mo Qingqing away from the Pill Emperor Hall. "The main reason is to kill Hua Xiaoyun. But of course, there's also the matter of your White Deer Institute," Qin Wenyan replied. "White Deer Institute?" Bai Lu Yi was taken aback. She didn't understand. "If I tell you, don't blame me for not telling you before," Qin Wenyan said. Bai Lu Yi's curiosity was piqued when she saw the mysterious look on Qin Wenyan's face. "Definitely. Do you know of the hidden bloodline of the Azure Emperor?" Qin Wenyan stared into Bai Lu Yi's eyes as he spoke. Bai Lu Yi's heart pounded violently as she halted her steps. This was the greatest secret of the White Deer Institute, something only the core members of the White Deer Institute knew of. Even after so many years, this secret had only grown fainter and fainter. However, how did Qin Wenyan know about this? Seeing the expression on Bai Lu Yi's face, Qin Wenyan already knew that Bai Lu Yi knew about this. Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes stared at Qin Wenyan. "I'm the successor of the Azure faction," Qin Wenyan replied, his words causing Bai Lu Yi's body to tremble involuntarily. She felt as though her brain had short-circuited. Qin Wenyan was the successor of the Azure faction? Qin Wenyan stretched out his hand, retrieving a medallion. The word Azure was engraved on the medallion. "Azure Emperor Medallion." Bai Lu Yi's voice trembled. Seeing Qin Wenyan keeping the medallion, she drew in a deep breath and asked, "In that case, are you here to take over the hidden bloodline of the White Deer Institute? Do you think that's possible?" Qin Wenyan asked. Bai Lu Yi contemplated for a moment before replying in a low voice, "It's hard to say. The White Deer Institute has existed for such a long time, and it would be extremely difficult to force them to obey just because of a command medallion. I don't have any intentions of making the White Deer Institute become my vassal force. But since you're from the Azure faction, are you really willing to remain hidden in the Grand Xia Empire? Why can't you make the Grand Xia Empire tremble?" Qin Wenyan laughed, his words casual and carefree. Yet, Bai Lu Yi's heart was filled with great waves of shock. "This is also a risk. If we fail, the White Deer Institute would be consigned to eternal damnation," Bai Lu Yi replied seriously. "Qin Wenyan, you have to promise me that before you have enough power, you will not spread the word that the White Deer Institute is part of the Azure faction. When the Azure Emperor fell back then, too many transcendent powers had a hand in it. If they knew that the Azure faction still exists, they would definitely exterminate them. Don't worry, before I have enough power, I will never let others know of my relationship with the White Deer Institute. At most, I'll let others misunderstand our relationship," Qin Wenyan joked, his words causing Bai Lu Yi to glare at him. "Fine, you have to work hard to gain the recognition of the White Deer Institute." A radiant smile appeared on Bai Lu Yi's face. "In that case, you will support me?" Qin Wenyan laughed, his words causing Bai Lu Yi to glare at him again. Didn't you tell me because you want me to support you? Qin Wenyan lowered his head and smiled. After that, he turned his gaze to the horizons and continued walking forward while he spoke in a low voice. If you don't support me, I will directly give up on the White Deer Institute. The White Deer Institute will forever be the White Deer Institute. Upon hearing Qin Wenyan's words, Bai Lu Yi's heart trembled once more. If she didn't support him, Qin Wenyan would give up on the Azure faction. Not only that, it was such a big secret, yet Qin Wenyan had told her not only because he wanted her support, but also because he wanted to know her attitude. This was trust. Qin Wenyan had already treated her as one of the people he trusted the most. I'll wait for the day when the Azure faction stands at the peak of Grand Xia. Qin Wenyan's silhouette seemed to grow taller and taller. The smile on Bai Lu Yi's innocent face was as radiant as the sun. She also believed that Qin Wenyan would be able to do it. Qin Wenyan and Bai Lu Yi continued walking forward, arriving at the place where Qin Wenyan had killed the middle-aged man. However, before they could even get close, Qin Wenyan halted his steps and gestured for Bai Lu Yi to keep quiet as he crouched behind the hill. Qin Wenyan's powerful perception could clearly sense that there were people from the Pill Emperor Hall, Zhan Chen and his beloved. As the number 11 ranker of the Heavenly Fate rankings, Zhan Chen's speed of arriving here was extremely fast. Staring at his beloved Qin Yu, Zhan Chen retrieved a medicinal pill and passed it to her. Qin Yu, eat this first, it will stimulate the energy in your body. Qin Yu glanced at Zhan Chen, her beautiful eyes as calm as still water. After which, she received the medicinal pill from Zhan Chen and swallowed it without hesitation. There's already someone who came here before us. There's no need to doubt his strength, but he's already dead. And just now, the third brother of the Li clan failed to break the formation and died inside. Zhan Chen pointed to the two interspatial rings in front of him as he calmly continued, "This is the most dangerous place. However, if we pass through this path, we might be able to reach the exit and obtain the Ascendant's inheritance." As he spoke, Zhan Chen's gentle and refined countenance flickered with sharpness. That was ambition. He was the strongest participant in this trial. If the Ascendant could obtain the inheritance, it would definitely belong to him. Qin Yu was clad in a light blue robe, looking clean and beautiful. Her gaze when she looked at Zhan Chen was always so gentle and beautiful, even at this moment. "Zhan Chen, you will definitely succeed." Qin Yu smiled. At this instant, her smile was incomparably beautiful. Even Zhan Chen couldn't help but feel his heart trembling as a hint of unwillingness flashed in his eyes. "After I die, the future of the Pill Emperor Hall will definitely belong to you." Qin Yu's smile was filled with a poignant beauty. Her words caused Zhan Chen's countenance to change as he stared at Qin Yu in shock. "I know, that medicinal pill will not only stimulate my potential, it will also cause me to lose my rationality and listen to your every command." Qin Yu still had a smile on her face as she spoke. However, her beautiful eyes were filled with tears as she continued, "Zhan Chen, we've known each other for 8 years. I understand you too well. From the first day we met, you have always been so clean and refined, but in your eyes, there's only ambition. I brought you into the Pill Emperor Hall, introduced you to my father, and allowed you to enter the tutelage of my senior granduncle. You've been so hardworking in your cultivation, and your achievements are clear for all to see. In these 8 years, you've become the most dazzling person in the Pill Emperor Hall. You're always filled with ambition, only for the sake of your dreams." Qin Yu smiled as she continued, "Back then, senior granduncle said that Qin Qing would become one of the most important people in the Pill Emperor Hall in the future. I know your heart has moved, but I'm no longer able to help you. However, Mo Qingqing might be able to. The gaze you used to look at her is the same as the gaze you used to look at me back then. I know that if it wasn't for me, senior granduncle would be more than willing to matchmake the two of you. The two of you are the two most dazzling figures in the Pill Emperor Hall, and I can only help you one last time." After speaking, Qin Yu turned and walked towards the formation where the third brother of the Li clan died. On the way here, there were already 3 people who had become Zhan Chen's stepping stones. And now, she was the last person to die. Her heart ached. When Zhan Chen took out the medicinal pill, her heart had already died. She understood him too well. Even a single glance from him couldn't be hidden from her. Since her heart had already died, what was the point of living on? Could it be that Zhang Chen really had to act against her personally? How could she allow herself to witness such a scene? Even if she died, she wouldn't allow it. From Qin Yu's body, the most beautiful astral soul was released. Wielding a sword with both hands, she released her aura to the extreme as she rushed into the formation. Upon seeing that beautiful radiance, Zhang Chen's heart twitched as a malevolent expression of agony flashed past his face. However, very quickly, it was replaced by determination and ambition. That sharpness of his could not be shaken by anyone or anything. That was his Tao heart. The path he had walked all the way here was too bitter, too tiring. He would continue on this path until the point where he could look down upon the entire Grand Xia. This was his heart. It was unshakable. Closing his eyes, Zhang Chen quietly sensed Qin Yu advancing forward, feeling her approaching death step by step. His heart had never been so calm before. However, at this moment, Zhang Chen's eyes abruptly snapped open as a terrifying cold light flickered within. After which, his silhouette flickered as he lunged towards the direction behind him. His speed was as fast as lightning, and his eyes were even sharper than swords. Chapter 268. When Zhang Chen closed his eyes, he instantly sensed that someone was spying on him. The killing intent in his heart instantly erupted forth. If news of this were to spread, Zhang Chen, the chosen of the Pill Emperor Hall, would do anything to achieve his goals, even sacrificing his own lover. The Pill Emperor Hall would definitely not spare him. The person spying on him had to die. Let's go! Qin Wenyan knew that Zhang Chen had discovered them the instant he dashed out. He hadn't expected Zhang Chen's perception to be so strong. Grabbing Bai Lu Yi's hand, Qin Wenyan retreated with explosive speed. "Sir, it's best if you stay behind." Zhang Chen's voice drifted over from behind as a terrifying coldness gushed forth, enveloping Qin Wenyan and Bai Lu. Just the intensity of that killing intent was enough to cause them to shiver in fear. How could Qin Wenyan and Bai Lu Yi stop? Executing the Garuda movement technique, Qin Wenyan increased his speed to the maximum. Zhang Chen, who was behind them, flicked his finger as an astral sword appeared in front of him. Zhang Chen's silhouette flickered as the astral sword pierced through the air, causing dust and sand to rise up in the air. However, the distance between Zhang Chen and Qin Wenyan was rapidly shortening. Although Qin Wentian's movement technique was strong, his cultivation base was only at the 3rd level of Yuanfu. Bai Lu Yi was the same as well, while Zhang Chen was at the peak of Yuanfu and ranked number 11 on the Heavenly Fate rankings. How could Qin Wentian compare to his speed? The difference in strength was too great. Qin Wentian's countenance was incredibly unsightly to behold, as a cold light flickered in his eyes. He had never imagined that he would stumble upon Zhang Chen's secret. Bzz. Qin Wentian's palms trembled as the Yellow Springs monument shot out, landing on the hillside in front of them. Go up. Qin Wenyan and Bai Lu Yi directly stepped onto the Yellow Springs monument, causing a terrifying aura to permeate the air. Qin Wentian's footsteps trembled as the Yellow Springs monument emitted a blood-colored glow. Zhang Chen dashed over, yet he abruptly halted his steps as he stared at Qin Wentian, who had already entered a divine inscription trap. His palms trembled as a screen of swords appeared in front of him. Die! Zhang Chen spat out a single word, and the screen of swords transformed into a sharp sword shadow that shot towards Qin Wenyan. Go down! Qin Wenyan pulled Bai Lu Yi along with him as they tumbled down the hill. The screen of swords whistled past their heads, exuding a bone-piercing chill. Zhang Chen coldly snorted. The sword light beneath his feet grew sharper and sharper, as though a boundless sword keening could be heard. He stepped out, stepping on his sword as he dashed towards the center of the divine inscription formation, dashing straight towards Qin Wenyan. Qin Wentian's countenance was incredibly unsightly to behold. He was truly unwilling to die like this. Little Wenyan. At this moment, a voice rang out from the side. A glimmer of hope appeared on Bai Lu Yi's pale countenance. Only now did Qin Wentian notice a silhouette sprinting over from the side. It was none other than Bai Lu Jing. A resolute look flashed in Qin Wentian's eyes. With a flick of his finger, fresh blood gushed forth. His finger imprinted itself onto the Yellow Springs monument as a blood-colored light frenziedly flowed into it. Zhang Chen casually waved his hand, and an earth-shattering sword appeared in the air, slashing towards Qin Wentian and Bai Lu. Qin Wentian's body flipped, and the Yellow Springs monument abruptly blasted out, aiming straight for Zhang Chen. A thunderous boom echoed out, and Zhang Chen could feel his heart pounding as his blood vessels trembled. At the same time, the sword slammed into the Yellow Springs monument. Rumble! The Yellow Springs monument was repelled by the sword's strike, slamming ruthlessly into Qin Wentian's body. Qin Wentian and Bai Lu Yi's bodies slid down the slope as they coughed out mouthfuls of blood. Bai Lu Jing had finally arrived. "Stay your hand!" Zhang Chen roared. His body turned illusory, akin to a shadow. In an instant, a fearsome killing art descended from the skies, slashing towards Zhang Chen. Zhang Chen's eyes widened in shock, his body trembling violently. Zhang Chen stabbed out with his finger, and a terrifying sword intent transformed into countless sword fragments, landing on the resplendent golden line of light. The golden line of light descended from the heavens, and the sword fragments completely dissipated, but it still continued to descend, slashing towards Zhang Chen's body. 9 slashes of the great sun. Zhang Chen's eyes narrowed, and the sword qi around him intensified. He stabbed out with his finger, landing on the golden line of light, and the terrifying destructive might caused the surrounding space to crackle. Finally, under the might of this finger strike, the golden line of light dissipated, and Bai Lu Jing appeared in front of Qin Wentian and Bai Lu Yi. "Brother!" Bai Lu Yi called out. A cold light flickered in Bai Lu Jing's eyes as he stared at Zhang Chen. Ranked 56th on the Heavenly Fate rankings, Bai Lu Jing. "Based on your strength, you should be able to advance a little further in the next ranking battle," Zhang Chen stated, staring at Bai Lu Jing. Bai Lu Jing's eyes flashed with killing intent. That earlier strike of Zhang Chen's was clearly aimed at killing Qin Wentian and Bai Lu Yi. A terrifying aura gushed forth from him as Bai Lu Jing released his astral souls. 3 astral souls appeared. One was the Blazing Flames astral soul, one was the Wind Shadow astral soul, and the last was the 7 Slaughters astral soul. The 3 astral souls originated from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th heavenly layers respectively. Zhang Chen, who was usually calm and composed, was now emanating a towering killing intent. "Big Brother Jing, this is just a misunderstanding." At this moment, Qin Wentian's voice drifted over. Bai Lu Jing froze for a moment, only to hear Qin Wentian continuing, "Zhang Chen, you chased after me and Bai Lu Yi for no reason at all. Is there a misunderstanding?" Zhang Chen was ranked number 11 on the Heavenly Fate rankings, a heavens chosen from the Pill Emperor Hall. Even if Bai Lu Jing was strong, if a battle really erupted, it would be disadvantageous to them. Zhang Chen glanced at Qin Wentian, only to see that his opponent's eyes were clear, without the slightest hint of hatred. He didn't expect Qin Wentian's schemes to run so deep, purposely acting as if it was a misunderstanding. In reality, Qin Wentian was hinting to him that he would pretend he didn't know what he saw earlier. As for the fact that he almost killed Qin Wentian didn't seem to care at all. Did he really not care? One could only say that Qin Wentian was extremely good at enduring. Zhang Chen, you're actually here as well." From afar, 2 silhouettes could be seen walking over. It was none other than Zhao Lai and the first elder of the Li clan. The first elder of the Li clan was extremely unlucky to have met Zhao Lai, hence he was forced to lead the way. This is the divine inscriptionist grandmaster. If that's the case, that's even better. With 2 divine inscriptionists here, we should be able to leave this damned place. Zhao Lai's gaze landed on Qin Wentian, as a fiery light flickered in his eyes. He initially thought that Zhang Chen was forcing Qin Wentian to lead the way, but Bai Lu Jing didn't agree, resulting in the confrontation. I think so too. Grandmaster Qin should be willing to lead the way, right?" Zhang Chen coldly asked as he stared at Qin Wentian. Qin Wentian understood that as long as he didn't die, the killing intent in Zhang Chen's heart wouldn't diminish. But wasn't he the same as well? If there was a chance, he would definitely kill Zhang Chen. Naturally. Qin Wendian laughed, agreeing to Zhang Chen's request. With little brother Qin leading the way, our journey would be much smoother. Old First laughed, the tense atmosphere from earlier dissipating into nothingness. Bai Lu Yi naturally understood the meaning behind Qin Wendian's words. She kept her mouth shut and pretended as though nothing had happened. However, as they continued onwards, Qin Wendian and Bai Lu Yi maintained a certain distance from Zhang Chen. Bai Lu Jing didn't ask anything, but how could he not understand the hidden meaning behind Qin Wendian's words? After a moment, they returned to the location where Zhang Chen and Qin Yu were conversing. At this moment, there was an additional interspatial ring. Not only that, there were other experts from the Hua clan present as well. They're all here. A voice drifted over from behind. Everyone turned their heads, only to see Yang Fan, Zhu Sha, and Bai Lu Jing walking over. The three of them were all experts from the star-seizing manor. They had actually gathered together. At this moment, the gazes of Yang Fan and Zhu Sha landed on Qin Wendian. A cold light flickered in their eyes, containing a hint of killing intent. From their point of view, Qin Wendian had to be held responsible for the deaths of over 10 experts from the star-seizing manor. However, they knew that now wasn't the time to deal with Qin Wendian. They still needed to borrow his strength to pass through the formation. Grandmaster Qin, please lead the way. Zhang Chen gestured to Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian glanced at the people in front of him. His countenance was calm, but in his heart he knew that he was in an extremely precarious situation. Right. Nodding his head, Qin Wendian began to inscribe the formation in front of him. Bai Lu Jing and Bai Lu Yi stood behind Qin Wendian, while Old Li followed Qin Wendian, joining forces to decipher the formation. Qin Wendian's movements were extremely slow, causing Old Li to feel that something was amiss. It was as though Qin Wendian was doing this on purpose. In reality, Qin Wendian had been waiting for an opportunity. But when he thought of the strength of those behind him, he knew that it would be impossible for him to kill all of them in a single move. Zhang Chen, Yang Fan, Zhao Lai and Hua Feng were all rankers on the Heavenly Fate rankings. It would be too difficult if he wanted to ambush them while he was deciphering the formation. An instant later, Qin Wendian picked up one of the interspatial rings, leaving the other one behind. Old Li froze as he picked up the interspatial ring. His eyes sunk in as an expression of agony and agony appeared on his face. Third brother. Old Li clutched the interspatial ring tightly. All of a sudden, his gaze froze as he saw the word Chen inscribed in front of Qin Wendian's body. Zhan Chen. Old Li's heart trembled as his body trembled unstably. Drawing in a deep breath, he pretended that he hadn't seen it, yet a glint of hatred flickered in his eyes. Qin Wendian's body blocked the words, and after he finished inscribing them, he immediately erased them as he continued to decipher the formation. Those behind him quietly followed behind. Gradually, the pine trees and ancient peaks appeared before their eyes, as though they were just inches away from them. They were getting closer, they were almost there. Fluctuations of divine inscriptions. Qin Wendian abruptly shifted his gaze forward. Although the pine trees and ancient peaks were just inches away from him, there was an indistinct feeling to them, as though there was a barrier of divine inscriptions blocking their path. Qin Wendian's movements involuntarily halted as he closed his eyes, quietly sensing the barrier of divine inscriptions in front of him. Qin Wendian could also sense that they were just a step away from the exit. Chapter 269. Those behind couldn't help but frown when they saw Qin Wendian stopping. A baleful aura radiated from Zhu Sha as he coldly asked, "What are you doing?" "It's hard to break the formation, I have to focus on comprehending it. If you don't feel at ease, why don't you try it yourself?" Qin Wendian coldly replied, his words causing Zhu Sha to snort coldly, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he stared at Qin Wendian with a cold glint in his eyes. After this matter was concluded, he would definitely teach Qin Wendian a lesson. A mere divine inscriptionist actually dared to be so arrogant, not knowing the immensity of death. Qin Wendian naturally understood the killing intent in Zhu Sha's heart, yet he pretended to be oblivious to it, closing his eyes and meditating for half a day. Behind him, a few others also arrived, but they were all waiting quietly. Finally, Qin Wenyan opened his eyes as he spoke to Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi. Big brother Jing, the two of you, try placing your hands on these two positions. After speaking, Qin Wenyan's palms streaked across the air as a beam of astral light shot out, landing on two positions on the rampart. Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi nodded as they advanced forward. Wait a minute. Behind them, someone suddenly spoke. It was none other than Zhu Sha. His countenance flashed with sharpness as he asked, "Why the two of them?" "It's just a probe, and there's a certain level of danger. If Senior is willing to act, I'm naturally more than willing." Qin Wenyan turned, smiling. Zhu Sha's countenance sank as he stared at Qin Wenyan, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. This young man's schemes were extremely deep. He had already tricked them once before, intentionally asking for their help. Yet when they refused, he found someone from the White Deer Institute and left. This time around, they mustn't fall for his tricks so easily. Maybe he was intentionally letting Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi go up, luring them to act. "Let them go first. Zhu Sha, the two of you follow behind." Yang Fan spoke, glancing at Qin Wenyan. He wanted to see what tricks Qin Wenyan had up his sleeves. If Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi passed, Zhu Sha could enter again. Zhu Sha and the other cultivator from the star-seizing manor nodded their heads in agreement as they followed after Bailu Jing and Bailu. Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi naturally trusted Qin Wenyan. They pressed their palms against the location Qin Wenyan had pointed to, and instantly, the divine inscription materialized, becoming clearer and clearer. Two doors abruptly appeared, and Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi's silhouettes abruptly vanished as they stepped through the doors. The countenances of Zhu Sha and Bailu Jing froze. Abruptly, they lunged forwards, placing their palms on the spot where the Bailu siblings had placed their palms. Abruptly, a terrifying baleful aura gushed forth. "Be careful." Qin Wenyan stepped out. However, it was already too late. Zhu Sha and Qin Wenyan were sent retreating as the terrifying destructive energy gushed towards them. Scram! Zhu Sha roared in rage as he blasted out with both his palms. Two gigantic palm imprints appeared, containing a terrifying might within them. Cracking sounds rang out unceasingly as the destructive energy dissipated into nothingness. Zhu Sha drew in a breath of cold air. His palms were a mess of flesh and blood. "Senior's movements were too fast. I didn't have enough time to warn you." Qin Wenyan and Old First walked over, smiling at Zhu Sha. Zhu Sha's palms trembled as he stared fixedly at Qin Wenyan. Didn't have enough time to warn him? How could he believe such nonsense? Glancing at his companions, they were in an even worse state. Their arms were a mess of flesh and blood. Yang Fan's countenance sank. This brat was doing this intentionally. Not to mention that Bailu Jing and Bailu had already passed, and they couldn't even see their silhouettes. This divine inscription is constantly changing. We should change the location for the second time. Qin Wenyan walked towards the divine inscription as he spoke. Exchanging a glance with Old First, he sent out a palm imprint. "Leave them behind." The countenances of Yang Fan, Zhan Chen, and the rest all changed. Earlier, the spectators had all noticed the wall of divine inscriptions attacking Zhu Sha. Qin Wenyan's hypocritical act had caused them to coldly snort in their hearts. But who would have thought that Qin Wenyan would suddenly make a move? But it was already too late. With a flash of light, Qin Wenyan and Old First's silhouettes vanished simultaneously, causing the countenances of all present to turn ashen. Qin Wenyan and Old First arrived at the other end of the divine inscription rampart, only to see Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi there. "Little brother Qin, Old Third, he?" Old First asked as he stared at Qin Wenyan. Zhan Chen, Bailu Yi and I eavesdropped on the conversation between him and his companion. Uncle Li San was forced to break the formation and died within. Not only that, Zhan Chen even asked his companion to personally enter the divine inscription rampart to test the formation. Qin Wenyan spoke, his words causing Bailu Jing's eyes to gleam with sharpness. "Did you all eavesdrop on his secret? That's why he chased after you and Little E?" I could only pretend that nothing had happened. Zhao Lai just so happened to arrive, so Zhang Chen didn't mention this matter. Qin Wenin nodded his head as he gazed ahead. At the foot of the ancient pine peak, there was a great hall, and within it, a statue could be seen. They've arrived. Based on their strength, this divine inscription rampart won't be able to trap them. Old first spoke. If those people joined forces, they would definitely be able to break apart the divine inscription rampart. Qin Wenin nodded his head. Let's go ahead and take a look. The four of them nodded their heads as they advanced towards the great hall at the foot of the ancient pine peak. There were no more traps outside, and they directly entered the great hall. The great hall was extremely spacious, and the statue in front of them resembled a human. It was extremely lifelike, and in its hands, there were two ancient scrolls. This great hall was extremely clean, and there was a layer of light enveloping it. Qin Wenin and the rest stood outside, but they didn't immediately enter. This was because there were many divine inscriptions flowing on the ground in front of them. It doesn't seem like a trap? Old first glanced at Qin Wenin. It seems like the energy of the divine inscriptions needs to be controlled by someone. Not only is it not a trap, it can even be controlled by someone proficient in divine inscriptions. Qin Wenin nodded his head. He had the same feeling as Old First. Let's go up and take a look. Bai Lu Jing laughed. He was truly audacious, directly taking a step forward. Instantly, on the ground in front of the statue, a golden light flashed as beams of golden light descended, blinding the eyes of those who saw it. After which, the ground cracked apart as a few silhouettes rose up from the ground. There were a total of 9 silhouettes, all of them radiating a resplendent golden light. Their eyes were as sharp as swords as they swept their gazes over to Qin Wenin and the rest. When Qin Wenin stared into the eyes of the 9 golden-armored silhouettes, he felt as though his body was about to be pierced through by their gazes. 4 of you arrived at the same time. Which one of you is the divine inscriptionist? One of the golden-armored silhouettes asked, his tone sharp. Qin Wenin stared at the golden-armored silhouette. I am. Me too. Old Man Li similarly spoke, narrowing his eyes. These 9 golden-armored silhouettes seemed to be puppets, yet their eyes seemed to contain intelligence. The gaze of the golden-armored silhouette swept over Qin Wenin and Old Man Li as he stated, "The 9 of us are golden-armored silhouettes created by our master. Our cultivation bases are at the peak of Yuanfu, and we are tasked to protect our master's inheritance. Only one of us will be chosen, and we must be a genius with extraordinary attainments in both divine inscriptions and martial Dao." Qin Wentian's countenance flickered. On the way here, there had been many tests, and it seemed that the purpose of these tests was indeed to select the most outstanding geniuses at the peak of Yuanfu. "Little E, stand behind me." Bai Lu Jing spoke. The 9 golden-armored silhouettes exuded an aura of sharpness. Among them, 4 of them stepped forward, their eyes gleaming with a terrifying killing intent. In their hands, they wielded golden long spears. They were the final test. Bai Lu Jing released his martial soul as a terrifying killing intent gushed forth from him. This was the power of the 7 Slaughters' astral soul. Not bad, but it's still insufficient. One of the golden-armored silhouettes glared at Bai Lu Jing. After which, he abruptly dashed out, his long spear piercing through the air, akin to a bolt of golden lightning. Bai Lu Jing took a step forward, executing the 9 beheadings of the Great Sun. His innate technique, infused with the will of his mandate, erupted forth as the lines of the Great Sun appeared in the air. "Break!" The golden-armored silhouette coldly roared. A bolt of lightning appeared on the tip of his long spear, slamming into the lines of the Great Sun, instantly shattering them apart. Bai Lu Jing's countenance stiffened. The combat prowess of this golden-armored silhouette was truly terrifying. The 9 beheadings of the Great Sun was unleashed once more, as rays of scorching sunlight cascaded downwards. A golden sun appeared above Bai Lu Jing's head as a terrifying storm of flames howled in rage. Even a peak-level Yuanfu cultivator would be split into 2 if they were struck by the rays of the Great Sun. However, the combat prowess of the golden-armored silhouette far exceeded his expectations. Bai Lu Jing had no way to deal with him. Qin Wenyin and Old Li also met the attacks of the golden-armored silhouette. Qin Wenyin stomped on the ground as a terrifying divine inscription erupted forth. There were many intricate and complicated divine inscriptions on the ground, all of which could be transformed into attacks for him to use. Qin Wenyin unceasingly controlled the divine inscriptions to attack. However, the golden-armored silhouette was too strong. He could destroy the divine inscriptions with a single strike. Step by step, the golden-armored silhouette walked towards Qin Wenyin as he icily stated, "Your strength is too weak, you aren't even qualified to compete for the inheritance. You deserve death." After speaking, the killing intent radiating from him intensified as he continued walking towards Qin Wenyin. Qin Wentian's countenance stiffened as he coldly stated, "When the refinement grounds opened, it all depended on one's own ability. The four of us were the first to arrive here. Naturally, it wasn't luck. Why are we not qualified to compete for the inheritance?" From the start to the end, leaving aside the talent of others just based on the tests here, the one who passed the test was none other than Qin Wenyin. But at this moment, the golden-armored silhouette actually said that he wasn't qualified to compete for the inheritance. How could he not be enraged? This inheritance not only tests one's attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions, it also tests one's strength. I don't know how the four of you arrived here, but with a cultivation base at the 3rd level of Yuanfu, how can you be qualified to receive the inheritance? This inheritance should be left to those with outstanding talent in the future. The killing intent of the golden-armored silhouette didn't diminish as he continued, "The inheritance doesn't belong to you." As the sound of his voice faded, the golden spear once again pierced towards Qin Wenyin. The sharpness in his eyes caused Qin Wenyin to feel pain in his eyes. This golden-armored silhouette wasn't lying, he really wanted to kill Qin Wenyin. Qin Wentian's heart grew colder. "What a good, the inheritance doesn't belong to you." Chapter 270. The killing intent of the golden-armored man intensified. A terrifying sharpness gushed forth from him as he stepped out. His golden long spear stabbed out explosively once more as a bolt of golden lightning shot towards Qin Wenyin. It was unknown how strong the might of this attack was. Qin Wenyin stepped out consecutively as divine inscriptions flashed, manifesting an azure dragon that soared towards the golden lightning. With a thunderous boom, the divine inscriptions shattered. "The 9 of us are the guardians of the inheritance, and our cultivation bases are all at the peak of Yuanfu. If the contender for the inheritance is outstanding in the Tao of divine inscriptions and has the support of divine inscriptions, he would be able to defeat us and seize the inheritance. However, you only have the attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions, how can you not die?" The words spoken by the golden-armored man were extremely sharp. With every step he took, a surge of sharpness bore down on Qin Wenyin, causing Qin Wenyin to feel as though his body was about to be pierced through. Qin Wenyin retreated, yet at this moment, the sound of whistling wind could be heard as several silhouettes dashed into the great hall. They were none other than Zhang Qin, Yang Fan, Zhao Lai, Orphan, and the rest. They had joined forces and used their strongest attack to break apart the barrier of divine inscriptions and immediately rushed towards the great hall. Upon seeing that Qin Wenyin and the rest had yet to obtain the inheritance, they heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. Seems like Qin Wenyin and the rest weren't having it easy. Zhu Sha's hands were still stained with blood. When he swept his gaze towards Qin Wenyin, his killing intent was extremely sharp. Now that they had arrived here, the inheritance was already in front of them. There was no need for Qin Wenyin anymore. This brat deserved to be killed. "Grandmaster Qin, how do you wish to die?" Zhu Sha icily asked. Qin Wenyin coldly stared at him. "Could it be that you guys don't wish to leave this secret realm?" Zhu Sha's countenance changed, only to see a golden-armored man speaking. "Since all of you are here, all of you have the qualifications to fight for the inheritance. If you defeat us, you will be able to obtain the treasure of the Ascendant. After that, the entire secret realm will be destroyed, and you can leave with ease." Hearing the golden-armored man's words, the killing intent in Zhu Sha's eyes intensified, and he grinned at Qin Wenyin. However, Zhang Qin, Yang Fan and the others were all staring at the ancient book in the statue's hand. They didn't even have the intention to kill Qin Wenyan anymore. If they could obtain the Empyrean's inheritance, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. From then on, they would become the only geniuses of their families and sections. For the various transcendent powers, regardless of sex or clans, there were countless geniuses in every generation. Right now, they were all at the peak of Yuanfu and feared the top rankers of the heavenly fate rankings. However, before them, there were also geniuses who had broken through to Heavenly Dipper, and their statuses weren't any lower than them. After them, there would still be more Heaven's favorites emerging. The geniuses were all candidates to become the leaders of their respective clans and sections. Only by defeating everyone else in this cruel competition would they be able to rise above the rest and become the one and only future leader. Now, the Empyrean's inheritance was undoubtedly a great opportunity. In Zhan Chen's palms, an incomparably sharp sword appeared. This was a peak-tier, third-ranked divine weapon. In Yang Fan's hands, a pair of armlets appeared, covering both his palms. This was also a peak-tier, third-ranked divine weapon. Although the Heaven's favorites didn't have any fourth-ranked divine weapons, it didn't mean that their sects didn't. However, they were all Heaven's favorites, and were the future leaders of their respective clans and sections. The requirements of their clans and sects were the strictest, and they wouldn't allow them to rely on powerful divine weapons. Even if they had one, it would only be used for survival or fleeing, and not for attacking purposes. This way, they might meet with danger in the outside world, but only by doing so would they be able to suppress their potential and force out their future. Even if they couldn't defeat their opponents, they would still have life-saving methods. Because they were Heaven's favorites. If there came a day when they could surpass the other Heaven's favorites, their clans and sects would no longer restrict them. The long spears in the hands of the golden-armored warriors emitted a crisp sound as they prepared themselves for battle. The inheritance book was right behind them. If they had the ability, they should go and get it. Zhan Chen's silhouette instantly dashed towards a golden-armored warrior. The sword in his hands slashed out, and in an instant, a resplendent rain of swords appeared in the air. This rain of swords actually congregated in the air, transforming into an incomparably sharp sword that pierced towards the head of the golden-armored warrior. The eyes of the golden-armored warrior gleamed with sharpness. The long spear in his hands trembled repeatedly, and in an instant, golden light filled the air. His palms trembled continuously as the golden light transformed into a golden screen that enveloped everything. The spear shot out, breaking apart the rain of swords. Yang Fan and the others simultaneously rushed out. His star-seizing palms contained boundless might, as though he could pluck the stars and moon from the sky. In addition to the terrifying divine weapon in his hands, his palms were filled with a terrifying destructive might, directly colliding with the long spear of the golden-armored warrior. Qin Wendian, on the other hand, wasn't having an easy time. That golden-armored warrior seemed determined to kill him no matter what. Zhu Sha, seeing that Yang Fan had already rushed over to snatch the inheritance book, turned his cold gaze onto Qin Wenyin. This brat deserved death. Zhu Sha's palms glowed with an intense astral light, as though he had been tempered by the constellations. Abruptly, he dashed out, blasting out with his palms. Instantly, a resplendent astral palm imprint blasted towards Qin Wenyan. Qin Wenyan's countenance turned ashen. There was still another golden-armored warrior attacking him. Qin Wenyan. Bai Lu-yi stood at the side of the great hall, her countenance pale. She stepped forward, only to see Zhu Sha blasting out with a palm strike. Bai Lu-yi groaned in agony as she coughed out fresh blood, and was directly flung out of the great hall. With her current strength, it was impossible for her to participate in the crisis-tempering grounds. Qin Wendian channeled the power of his divine inscriptions to defend against Zhu Sha's star-seizing palms. However, the terrifying palm imprints still penetrated his defenses, causing his blood and qi to churn violently. At the same time, the long spear in the hands of the golden-armored warrior stabbed out with lightning speed, causing Qin Wendian's eyes to widen in shock. This spear strike was incomparably fast, containing boundless might. There was no way he could block it. No! Bai Lu Yi's countenance turned as white as a sheet of paper. Bai Lu Jing was also being held back by the golden armored warrior and had no way to support Qin Wenyin. Puchi! A light sound rang out as the long spear pierced through Qin Wenyan's body, piercing through him. Yet the spear was pulled out in an instant, showing how sharp it was. Qin Wenyan's body was slammed into the walls of the great hall as a deafening boom echoed out. His head spun as his heart turned into ashes. Damn it! Zhu Sha coldly snorted as he once again blasted out a palm strike towards Qin Wenyan. Bai Lu Yi dashed over, blocking the attack, and with a deafening boom, her body slammed ruthlessly into Qin Wenyan, causing her to cough out large mouthfuls of blood. Literally, Bai Lu Jing's countenance paled as he howled in rage. However, the strength of the golden armored warrior in front of him was simply too terrifying. There was no time for him to be distracted, and a golden long spear almost pierced through his heart. The 9 golden armored warriors were all at the pinnacle of Yuanfu. How difficult would it be to obtain the inheritance? Zhu Sha coldly laughed upon seeing this. He advanced forward, wanting to kill Bai Lu Yi and Qin Wenyan. However, his footsteps abruptly halted as he saw the cold gazes of the golden armored warriors boring into his body, causing him to shiver involuntarily. These golden armored warriors didn't just want to kill Qin Wenyan. They wanted to kill all of them, leaving behind only those who had the qualifications to obtain the inheritance. The golden armored warriors launched their attacks at Zhu Sha, and Zhu Sha could only defend himself. He didn't have the time to check on Qin Wenyan. Bai Lu Yi's countenance was as pale as a sheet of paper as she walked to the side of Qin Wenyan. Seeing the unceasing flow of blood, Bai Lu Yi tore a corner of her robe and pressed it against Qin Wenyan's wound. Qin Wenyan, wake up. Bai Lu Yi patted Qin Wenyan's face as she continued, you can't fall asleep. Qin Wenyan's consciousness was blurry at this moment. Zhu Sha's ferocious attack, as well as the spear strike from the golden armored warrior. One could only imagine the severity of his injuries. He only felt a sense of dizziness, as though he wanted to sleep forever. Amidst his hazy consciousness, he could faintly sense someone calling out to him. The voices in his ears grew softer and softer, and at this moment he fell into absolute silence. Am I going to die? I can't accept this. Qin Wenyan's heart was filled with pain. There were too many things he had yet to accomplish. How could he die here? But at this moment he really wanted to sleep. He was in so much pain that he didn't want to think about all of this. Within Qin Wenyan's body, the candle flame was still blazing. Strands of golden threads intertwined around the candle flame. This candle flame was like the flame of his heart. His heart sense seemed to be contained within this candle flame. This candle flame seemed to be dimming. The calling from the outside world grew weaker and weaker, and the silhouettes around him grew more and more blurry. Was he really going to die? The cruel path of the martial path was filled with dangers and dangers. Qin Wenyan had come all the way here, yet the golden armored warrior said that he wasn't qualified to receive the inheritance. Why wasn't he qualified? Was it because his cultivation base was too low? The candle flame was still blazing. The power of his bloodline circulated around the candle flame, and the terrifying aura from the golden armored warrior gradually weakened. However, at this moment, within the flickering light of the candle flame, Qin Wenyan saw a familiar silhouette. That silhouette got closer and closer, becoming clearer and clearer. Uncle Black. Qin Wenyan's heart was still trembling. Wenyan. It was as though a voice rang out in his heart. You cannot die. Another voice resounded in his heart. I cannot die. An intense obsession surged in Qin Wenyan's heart. How could he die? Where did Uncle Black go? Was Qingsheng doing well in the Pill Emperor Hall? Dai was still in the 9 Mystical Palace. The Azure faction had yet to rise up. How could he die? The candle flame lit up. The golden threads gradually fused into the candle flame, growing brighter and brighter. In an instant, Qin Wenyan's heart was lit up as well. Roar! Another surge of bloodline power roared, filled with a boundless terror. This surge of bloodline power seemed to originate from the primordial era as it let out a roar of rage. What made Qin Wenyin even more shocked was that the bloodline power within his body seemed to have transformed into a gigantic primordial beast, peering down at the heavens and earth with disdain. Within the candle flame, Qin Wentian's silhouette could be seen. He inclined his head and stared at the silhouette of the primordial beast, feeling a deep sense of awe. Why was the bloodline in his body so powerful? Not only that, the power of the primordial bloodline seemed to fear the candle flame. Do you know who you are? A voice rang out in his heart. He, Qin Wenyin, possessed such a powerful bloodline. Who was he? Did the golden-armored man say that he wasn't worthy of the inheritance? In that case, he wanted to see if the inheritance of this ascendant had the qualifications to say that he wasn't worthy. The candle flame grew brighter, the power of the bloodline grew stronger, and his injuries were healing. As long as the fire in his heart wasn't extinguished, he would live forever. The golden threads around the candle flame abruptly transformed into a bolt of lightning, shooting towards the center of Qin Wentian's brows. Instantly, the center of Qin Wentian's brows trembled, as though a third eye was about to open. Chapter 271. Qin Wenyin only felt a piercing pain in the center of his brows, as though there was a strange energy squirming there. This strange movement seemed to be resonating with the candle flame in his body. What his heart saw was in the center of his brows. Strands of golden threads connected the candle flame to the center of his brows, and Qin Wenyin could sense it even more clearly. This was also the power of a bloodline. In his body, there was more than one type of bloodline. The bloodline that was as violent as a demon, the bloodline that was once sealed by chains, was violent and terrifying, as though it came from the primordial era, like a king among demons. However, he was filled with trepidation and dread towards the candle flame. That candle flame's bloodline might even be of a higher grade than the primordial demon king's bloodline. In a person's body, there were two types of bloodlines, both of which were of such a high grade. Qin Wenyin asked himself, who was he? Who were his parents? The middle-aged man he often saw in the tiny astral being should be his father, right? Why would he leave his memories in the tiny astral being for him? No matter how many thoughts ran through his mind, he had no way to answer them. He wanted to open his eyes, but to no avail. However, he discovered that he could already see everything outside. It was as though he had another eye, and the scenes outside were directly imprinted into his heart. He saw Bai Lu Yi, whose countenance was pale, worrying about his life. He saw Bai Lu Jing, who was still engaged in a life-and-death struggle, and the golden-armored guards. At this moment, Bai Lu Yi's countenance suddenly changed, as a hint of color returned to her pale countenance. She saw that Qin Wentian's wounds were no longer bleeding, and that Qin Wentian's aura was recovering, as well as his vitality. All of a sudden, Bai Lu Yi's countenance stiffened. She lifted her head, staring at the center of Qin Wentian's brows. There seemed to be a golden bolt of lightning shooting out, as though it was an eye. Bai Lu Yi felt her heart pounding as she stared at Qin Wenyin. An instant later, the golden eye closed once more, only to see Qin Wenyin opening his eyes and staring at her. You're awake? A smile appeared on Bai Lu Yi's face. This guy finally woke up. She was frightened just now. She thought that Qin Wenyin would never wake up. Qin Wenyin nodded and looked at the battlefield. At this moment, he realized that he could see through the cultivation of these people. Zhang Chen, Yang Fan and Zhu Sha were all at the 9th level of Yuanfu. Even those golden-armored men had a cultivation base at the 9th level of Yuanfu. Qin Wenyin frowned slightly. How was this possible? These golden-armored men actually had cultivation. Weren't they just puppets? It was clearly impossible for a puppet to have a cultivation level. However, after opening the divine golden eye, he could clearly sense that these golden-armored men had a cultivation level. The fact that the golden-armored man had a cultivation base meant that they were humans and not puppets. A stellar martial cultivator at the peak of Yuanfu, yet he was willing to be a puppet? Qin Wenyin didn't understand. He glanced at the ground again. Instantly, the crisscrossing divine inscriptions appeared in his mind. There was no need for him to use his heart sense to sense them, He could see through them with a single glance. Every single divine inscription, every single complete divine inscription, could be seen with a single glance. And at this moment, his eyes suddenly lit up as a faint smile appeared on his face. So this was the case. The ascendant who left behind this inheritance was an extremely powerful Grandmaster inscriptionist. He left behind a complete fourth-ranked divine inscription, and this fourth-ranked divine inscription could be divided into many peak-tier, third-ranked divine inscriptions. Such a method truly caused one to sigh in amazement. If it weren't for the fact that there were some transformations occurring in his body, he would never have been able to comprehend it. This vast hall itself was a gigantic divine inscription. Instantly, Qin Wentian's body fused into the divine inscription. This fourth-ranked divine inscription was right beneath his feet. Now that he had seen through it and comprehended it, it was extremely simple to use it. The corners of Qin Wentian's mouth curled up into a light smile. That demonic smile caused Bai Lu Yi to be dumbfounded. This fellow had changed again. What was with that eye earlier? You left a fourth-ranked divine inscription here. If no one discovered it, they could only depend on their combat prowess as well as these third-ranked divine inscriptions to determine who the inheritor would be. But if someone discovered it, that person would be able to end everything and become your inheritor. You are truly meticulous. Qin Wenyin mused in his heart. This tempering ground was all for the sake of selecting the successor he was most satisfied with. However, when he, Qin Wenyin, arrived here, the golden-armored man said that he wasn't worthy, that he didn't have the qualifications to receive the inheritance. But what about now? Qin Wenyin stood up, his eyes flashing with a cold sharpness as he swept his gaze over those who were currently in combat. Follow behind me. Qin Wenyin smiled at Bai Lu Yi. Bai Lu Yi froze for a moment before replying, "You still want the inheritance? Let's go." After speaking, Bai Lu Yi pulled Qin Wenyin along, wanting to leave. Although she knew that Qin Wentian's physique had undergone some changes, his cultivation base was still too low. Qin Wentian's cultivation base was only at the third level of Yuanfu, while the people here were all geniuses at the peak of Yuanfu, ranked in the heavenly fate rankings. Even if he borrowed the power of the divine inscriptions, Qin Wenyin wouldn't be able to obtain the inheritance. In fact, he might even be killed by the golden-armored man. This place was too dangerous. They had to leave. However, Bai Lu Yi only saw Qin Wenyin standing there unmoving. He smiled at her, "Trust me." Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes froze. Before this, she had always trusted Qin Wenyin. But this time around, she felt that he was unreliable. After all, what Qin Wenyin wanted to do was too unrealistic. Her elder brother, Bai Lu Jing, was a ranker on the heavenly fate rankings, yet he had no hope at all. He could only defend against the attack of the golden-armored man. "You didn't die even after that?" Zhu Sha's cold voice drifted over. The golden-armored man was taken aback as he glanced at Qin Wenyin with a sharp gaze. That attack of his actually failed to kill Qin Wenyin? Help me deal with him. The golden-armored man glanced at the other golden-armored men who were still guarding the statue. Momentarily, one of the golden-armored men flickered as it lunged toward Zhu Sha. The golden-armored man who was fighting against Qin Wenyin also left the battle and walked towards Qin Wenyin. "Your recovery speed isn't bad." The golden-armored man coldly spoke. Abruptly, his long spear erupted forth. This time around, he would never allow Qin Wenyin to live. That mistake earlier was a humiliation to him. Bai Lu Yi's countenance stiffened as her countenance paled. However, she only saw Qin Wenyin advancing forwards, and an instant later, the divine inscriptions on the ground lit up. Roar! An azure dragon roared, blasting towards the golden-armored man. At the same time, a terrifying great axe descended from the skies, cleaving downwards. There were also throat-slicing arrows that shot towards the golden-armored man. With every step Qin Wenyin took, a towering might could be felt. The divine inscriptions around him all lit up, moving according to his will. Rumble! The terrifying attacks blasted towards the golden-armored man, causing him to stagger backwards. The divine inscriptions on the golden-armored man's body changed slightly as he stared at Qin Wenyin. The terrifying divine inscriptions around him flickered unceasingly, and there were even signs that they were expanding outwards. Huh! The eyes of the golden-armored man narrowed. How could this be? Bai Lui was also stunned. She stared in bewilderment at Qin Wenin, who was enveloped by a screen of light. His divine inscriptions seemed to have grown even stronger. Die! The golden-armored man roared as he stabbed out with his spear. A terrifying vortex appeared, engulfing Qin Wenin. Qin Wenin snorted. Abruptly, a gigantic python appeared from below, coiling around the golden-armored man's body. The golden-armored man howled in rage as he struggled to break free from the python's grasp, only to see a barrage of arrows shooting towards him. He twisted his spear, blocking the incoming arrows. Scram! Qin Wenin roared. With a thunderous boom, the gigantic hammer slammed into his body, sending him flying through the air. The battle here instantly attracted the attention of the other golden-armored men, as well as Zhang Qin and the rest. Their eyes involuntarily narrowed when they saw the changes in Qin Wenin. The circulating divine inscriptions grew increasingly stronger, and the entire Great Hall seemed to be trembling, as though it was about to fall under Qin Wentian's control. The entire Great Hall grew even more radiant. Zhu Sha's countenance turned ashen. Qin Wenin was controlling all the divine inscriptions in the Great Hall. We have to kill him first. Zhu Sha pointed to Qin Wenin as he spoke. At this moment, a thunderous rumbling sound echoed out as the divine inscriptions in the Great Hall converged together, manifesting an incomparably gigantic astral arm in the air. The crowd stared in shock at this scene. Was this the divine inscriptions of the Great Hall? This fellow, he's controlling all the divine inscriptions in the Great Hall. Bai Luyi's heart pounded as she felt the might of the astral arm. Even the ascendant who left behind the inheritance would have never imagined that the one who activated the fourth-ranked divine inscriptions would have a cultivation base at the third level of Yuanfu. If it weren't for these divine inscriptions, even if Qin Wenin underwent a transformation, he still wouldn't have the qualifications to contend against these ascendants. But this place was his battlefield. The divine inscriptions inscribed by the ascendant were prepared for him, and would be under his control. Qin Wenin stared at Zhu Sha, the coldness in his eyes causing Zhu Sha's body to involuntarily tremble. Earlier, he was the one who had attacked Qin Wenin, causing Bai Lui to be heavily injured. Zhu Sha, he deserved to die. In the air, a gigantic astral arm descended from the skies. Zhu Sha could feel the terrifying might radiating from it, and he felt as though he was facing a heavenly Dipper sovereign's astral arm. His heart pounded furiously. His silhouette flickered, wanting to retreat, only to see the astral arm sweeping past him. A thunderous boom rang out as the earth trembled violently. The spectators felt their hearts pounding violently as they stared at the palm imprint imprinted on the ground. The astral arm shifted away, yet Zhu Sha had already transformed into a puddle of blood. Not even his bones remained, he had been killed. Qin Wenin then turned his gaze onto the golden-armored young man. The look in his eyes actually caused the golden-armored young man's heart to involuntarily tremble. He then spoke to Qin Wenin. Congratulations on passing the test. The inheritance belongs to you. Upon hearing the golden-armored young man's words, Qin Wenin didn't feel happy at all. On the contrary, his eyes were as cold as ever. He had almost died here, and Bai Lui had almost died as well. He had participated in the refinement grounds, and there had been several life and death situations. If the golden-armored young man wasn't willing to pass the inheritance to him, he could have just let him go. Yet, the golden-armored young man had directly acted to kill him. Inheritance? Qin Wenin laughed. I almost died here, and you're telling me that I've passed the test? Test? What qualifications do you have to test me? As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, the astral arm slammed down, shattering the golden-armored young man into pieces. Chapter 272. Inheritance? Test? If you acknowledge me, then I'll acknowledge the inheritance. Before this, you said that I'm not qualified and wanted to kill me. But now, you used your life to exchange for everything, using the word test to describe everything? Right now, Qin Wenyan was nothing but a predator. Since you want to pass on the inheritance, then I'll snatch it away. Seeing how Qin Wenyan killed Zhu Sha and the golden-armored young man, the expressions of the people in the Great Hall all changed. Their gazes were all fixed on Qin Wenyan, their countenances flickering with sharpness. At this moment, Qin Wenyan swept his gaze onto Zhang Chen, as a terrifying killing intent flickered in his eyes. Zhang Chen could feel the coldness in Qin Wenyan's eyes, and he knew that Qin Wenyan wanted to kill him. Bzz. A raging wind gusted by as Qin Wenyan waved his palms. Momentarily, the astral arm shot towards Zhang Chen, as fast as lightning. In the Great Hall, Qin Wenyan was the overlord. Zhang Chen's countenance drastically changed. His astral soul erupted forth, and his entire person was bathed in boundless sword light. His body seemed to be fused with the sword, and the terrifying whistling sounds of the sword could be heard as the astral arm trembled. Slash! Zhang Chen roared, and a blood-colored beam of light appeared on his finger, piercing through the air. Instantly, a blood-colored gigantic sword howled as it shot out. Boom! The astral arm slammed into the gigantic sword, causing it to buzz unceasingly, as though it wanted to block the path of the astral arm. Zhang Chen's countenance grew heavy as he frantically pointed his finger forward. Kill him! Zhang Chen roared, only to see Yang Fan's silhouette flickering as he lunged towards Qin Wenyan. His palms could pluck the stars and seize the moon, exuding boundless might. But at the same time, Bai Lu Jing also appeared beside Qin Wenyan. Executing the 9 beheadings of the great sun, golden rays of light manifested in the air, directly slicing apart the palm imprint. Qin Wenyan coldly snorted as thunderous rumbling sounds echoed out. The divine inscriptions on the ground howled with rage as they frenziedly swept towards Yang Fan. At the same time, a few long spears pierced toward Zhang Chen. Zhang Chen's countenance paled as he slammed out with his palms. Momentarily, a beam of light appeared in the air as Zhang Chen slashed out with his palms. Instantly, a bright light flashed as Zhang Chen's body was swept away. A light sound rang out, and the crowd only saw Zhang Chen's body reappearing outside the Great Hall. He coughed out several mouthfuls of blood. Qin Wenyan turned his gaze over to Zhang Chen, who was standing outside the main hall. Their gazes met, and both of them were filled with a terrifying killing intent. They both wanted to kill each other as soon as possible. As expected of a heavens chosen from the Pill Emperor Hall, Qin Wenyan was truly difficult to deal with. Even with the aid of a 4th-ranked grand formation, Qin Wenyan had no way to kill him. If he only relied on his own strength, Zhang Chen would be able to kill him easily. After all, he hadn't cultivated for a long time, and his cultivation base was still shallow. Qin Wenyan stared at Yang Fan once again. His astral arms were as fast as lightning, and Yang Fan's countenance was incredibly ugly to behold. He violently blasted out with his star-seizing palms, causing Yang Fan to be forced to retreat with great speed. After which, he stepped out of the Great Hall as well. If he stayed behind, with Qin Wenyan controlling everything in the Great Hall, he would still die. Qin Wenyan then turned his gaze to Hua Feng and the rest. Their countenances were all incomparably unsightly, and they all retreated, leaving the Great Hall. However, they didn't go too far away, and merely waited outside the Great Hall, their eyes flickering with an intense coldness. Qin Wenyan could borrow the power of the divine inscriptions to control everything in the Great Hall. Nobody could contend against him, and anyone who stayed within the Great Hall would be met with a crisis of death. But even if Qin Wenyan obtained the inheritance, he would still have to exit the Great Hall. As long as he did so, they would make sure that he would die without a burial ground. Those golden-armored men all stared at Qin Wenyan. They understood that Qin Wenyan could do whatever he wanted here, and if they stayed behind, they would all die in Qin Wenyan's hands. B. The astral arms swept out as one of the golden-armored men roared in rage. This brat is a traitor, there's no way to control him. I will delay him. The rest of you join forces to summon the Golden Armor King to kill him. As the sound of his voice faded, a long spear erupted forth, slamming into the astral arms. Boundless golden light radiated from his body, and it felt as though his body was on the verge of shattering, Yet he stubbornly endured it. At the same time, the other golden-armored men also shot out their spears, directly blasting into the statue. Boom! A crisp sound rang out from the statue, as though the outer shell of the statue had shattered. Gradually, rays of golden light flashed, and Qin Wenyin discovered that this statue was also a golden-armored man, but the size of this one was much larger. Puppet! Qin Wenyin could tell with a single glance that this golden-armored man was different from the 9 golden-armored men. The 9 golden-armored men had a cultivation base, and weren't puppets. But the golden-armored giant before him was a true puppet. That golden armor seemed to be forged from gold, and was filled with a terrifying might. Chi chi chi! The bodies of the golden-armored men all exploded at the same time, seeking their own deaths. After which, golden motes of light shot out from their bodies and shot towards the golden-armored giant, drilling into its body. Since you don't want to acknowledge the inheritance, just die then. The golden-armored man howled in joy as Qin Wenyin crushed him. After which, the golden-armored man's body also exploded, and the golden motes of light drilled into the golden-armored giant's body. Instantly, the golden-armored giant opened its eyes and stood up, placing the 2 ancient scrolls on the ground. Its eyes were filled with boundless killing intent as it stared at Qin Wenyin. Boom! The golden-armored giant stepped out, causing the earth to tremble. This caused Qin Wenyan's eyes to gleam with sharpness. The 9 golden-armored men weren't puppets, they were humans. And as for this statue, everyone thought that it was the inheritance left behind by an ascendant who had fallen here. Who would have thought that the statue was actually a puppet? Such a scene couldn't help but cause people to ponder. Qin Wenyin stared at the golden-armored giant, as though he wanted to see through it completely. In this training ground where only Yuanfu cultivators could enter, a 4th-ranked puppet was indeed an invincible existence. Bzz. The golden-armored giant flicked a finger at Qin Wenyin. As the finger landed, the space around it seemed to distort as a terrifying amount of heavenly energy congregated around it, causing a beam of golden light to appear, capable of penetrating through everything. Qin Wenyan's countenance changed. The astral arm instantly appeared in front of him as he blasted out a terrifying palm strike. The 2 attacks collided, causing the Great Hall to tremble unceasingly. Boundless amounts of divine inscriptions surged forth, blasting towards the golden-armored giant as the astral arm also smashed out. However, the golden-armored giant wasn't afraid at all. He continued advancing, and with a wave of his hand, he ruthlessly collided with the astral arm. Boom! The astral arm directly grabbed the palms of the golden-armored giant, refusing to let go. Qin Wenyan's silhouette whistled through the air, as fast as lightning, as he dashed towards the golden-armored giant. The eyes of the golden-armored giant were fixated on Qin Wenyin. It was akin to a bolt of golden lightning, wanting to penetrate Qin Wenyan's head. Qin Wenyin only felt a piercing pain in the center of his brows. Similarly, a terrifying light erupted forth from the center of his brows, colliding with the gaze of the golden-armored giant. Qin Wenyan's palms were placed on the golden-armored giant's body as a cold smile appeared on his face. A 4th-ranked puppet could flaunt its might? Qin Wenyin blasted out with his palms, only to see an expression of disdain flickering in the eyes of the golden-armored giant. A mere 3rd-level Yuanfu cultivator wanted to shake a 4th-ranked puppet? Was this a dream? Shatter the void. Qin Wenyin blasted out with his palms, directly slamming into the head of the puppet. Instantly, a surge of energy gushed into the mind of the puppet, causing its eyes to change color. A surge of energy was destroying its defensive divine inscriptions. How was this possible? Qin Wenyin could see through its divine inscriptions? The defensive divine rune on his head was the most well hidden, so how could it be broken? Divine inscriptions were completely inscribed. Even if a divine inscriptionist's perception was strong enough to see it, how difficult would it be to decipher it? However, as Qin Wenyin slammed his palm down, it clearly discovered that the defensive divine runes in its head were disintegrating. How high was Qin Wenyan's attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions? Right now, his perception was even more terrifying than before. It was as though he could see through the divine inscriptions of his opponent. How difficult would it be for him to decipher them? Qin Wentian's palms struck out continuously, and every strike landed on the giant's head. The golden-armored giant let out a roar, but soon with a loud thud, the golden-armored giant knelt on the ground. Roar! Roars of unwillingness rang out. You will die a horrible death. The sound of curses rang out, yet Qin Wentian's countenance was as cold as ever. He frenziedly unleashed his attacks until the golden-armored giant became a masterless puppet. Only then did Qin Wentian store it into his interspatial ring. The masterless puppet from now on belonged to him. Qin Wentian slowly walked towards the two ancient scrolls. He picked them up, and after which, Qin Wentian opened them, sending his will into one of the ancient scrolls. This ancient scroll contains all the powerful innate techniques I've cultivated, as well as the insights I've gained from comprehending the divine inscriptions. Now, I'll pass them all on to you. An ancient voice drifted into his ears. Qin Wentian sent his will into it, and as expected, he saw many powerful innate techniques. Qin Wentian laughed. He sent his will into the other scroll, only to hear a voice reverberating in his mind. This Lord is the gold element celestial. When I was young, my path was filled with hardships. After that, I obtained a heaven-defying cultivation technique, the gold element ancient scroll, and cultivated an indestructible golden body. My entire body was akin to a divine weapon, and from then on, I roamed unhindered in Grand Xia, sweeping through all the experts. This Lord was harmed by my enemies, and passed away in meditation. I left behind my inheritance, imparting everything I've cultivated in my entire life to my descendants. If there's someone who is fated to pass the test and receive my inheritance, you must cultivate it well. Remember 3 things. Firstly, this cultivation technique is heaven-defying and must never be made known to others, including the elders of the sect. If not, calamity would surely befall this Lord. Secondly, this cultivation technique is incomparably tyrannical, and when cultivating it, one would encounter many abnormalities, and only those with great determination would be able to cultivate it. Thirdly, you must never let anyone know that you're cultivating this cultivation technique. If my enemies learn of it, you'll die without a doubt. But of course, if one day you have some accomplishments and step into the celestial phenomenon realm, you'll definitely be able to find out who my enemies are. If you have the heart, avenge this Lord. The voice faded away, dissipating into nothingness. Qin Wentian's eyes flickered with an intense sharpness. The gold element ancient scroll, a heaven-defying cultivation technique? Cultivating it without letting others know of it? A cold light flashed in Qin Wentian's eyes. He thought of the 9 golden armored guardians. They weren't puppets, but humans. Little brother Qin, congratulations on obtaining the Ascendant's inheritance. Old Li laughed. He, Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi remained in the Great Hall. Qin Wentian smiled at Old Li, after which, he walked to the entrance of the Great Hall and stared at the crowd as he spoke. The disputes in the secret realm are all for the sake of obtaining the inheritance. Now that I've obtained it, I'm sure all of you want to kill me. I, Qin, don't wish to be invincible in the entire moon continent. I'm willing to forsake the Ascendant's inheritance and bestow it to all of you. After speaking, Qin Wentian flicked his palms, tossing the ancient scroll out of the Great Hall, causing the crowd to be dumbfounded. Ascendant's inheritance? Qin Wentian had discarded it like a pair of worn-out shoes. Chapter 273. This inheritance, Qin Wentian had no choice but to give it up. The 9 golden armored cultivators resembled puppets, yet they were in the form of humans. If it wasn't for the fact that Qin Wentian had opened his third eye, he would have been deceived by the golden armored cultivators, thinking that they were puppets. 9 stellar martial cultivators didn't release their astral souls, yet they cultivated the same type of energy. Indeed, they resembled puppets. However, after Qin Wentian looked at the gold punishment ancient scroll, a thought popped up in his head. Could it be that these 9 golden armored cultivators also cultivated the inheritance? As for the message left behind, it also caused Qin Wentian to feel suspicious. The golden-armored cultivator mentioned that this cultivation art was tyrannical, and that there would be abnormalities when cultivating it. He even warned Qin Wenyan not to let his elders know about this, causing him to feel that something was wrong. Even though the golden-armored cultivator pointed out that he was killed by someone close to him, Qin Wenyan still had his suspicions. Since they were looking for someone to inherit the inheritance, why were only Yuan Fu cultivators able to enter, and Heavenly Dipper sovereigns couldn't? Since Heavenly Dipper sovereigns couldn't enter, it could be explained that the inheritance only depended on one's talent. But why did the golden-armored cultivator say that his cultivation base was too low and he wasn't worthy of the inheritance? Not only that, although his cultivation base wasn't high, he knew that he had an extraordinary background. Not to mention that he had obtained multiple cultivation arts from the Azure Emperor. Hence, he didn't place much importance on this cultivation art. No matter how heaven-defying the golden-armored cultivator's words were, his heart wouldn't waver. Qin Wentian's personality was extremely decisive. Since he had suspicions and it wasn't a cultivation art that he needed, he would directly give it up. His heart didn't waver in the slightest. He didn't even leave it behind for Bailu Jing and Bailu. He felt that there might be a problem with the inheritance. Qin Wenyan stared at the people outside the Great Hall. None of them moved, and their eyes gleamed with sharpness as they stared at the ancient scroll. Evidently, none of them had expected Qin Wenyan to do this. Even Bailu Yi and the rest turned pale. It wasn't easy for them to obtain this inheritance, and they actually wanted to give it away? Glancing at the people standing outside, Zhang Chen, Yang Fan, Zhao Lai, and Hua Feng, the powers behind these people could indeed represent the entire moon continent. If Qin Wenyan became enemies with them, Qin Wenyan would no longer be able to establish a foothold in the moon continent. In fact, it might even affect her White Deer Institute. That ancient scroll contains the inheritance art of the gold element ascendant. Now I'll give it up and give it to all of you. As for the ancient scroll in my hand, it contains the inheritance of the Tao of divine inscriptions and formations. It's exactly what I need. I, Qin, will keep it for myself. In that case, I won't let down all of you. Let's forget about the enmity between us after we exit this place. Naturally, if all of you still refuse to give up and come looking for trouble with me, I, Qin, will definitely kill all of you. Qin Wentian's voice rumbled like thunder, filled with magnanimity. Although he said it this way, Qin Wenyan understood in his heart that the enmity between them wouldn't be resolved so easily. Not to mention that Zhang Chen, he had already exposed his secret. How could Zhang Chen spare him? But now, he had already said that he wasn't willing to become the target of public criticism. At the very least, if he gave up the inheritance art, would these heavens chosen from the transcendent powers have the face to use the elders of their respective clans or sects to deal with him? After speaking, Qin Wenyan flicked his sleeves as rumbling sounds echoed out. Momentarily, the doors of the great hall slowly closed, no longer bothering with the matters of the outside world. Outside, the eyes of the crowd gleamed with sharpness as they stared at the ancient scroll. So it turned out that this was the inheritance art left behind by the gold element ascendant. This cultivation art, I want it. Only to see that Zhao Lai was the first to step out. A blazing saber appeared in his hands, flickering with a terrifying fiery light, exuding a terrifying heat. His silhouette dashed out, directly aiming for the ancient scroll. As soon as he moved, the others also moved. Yang Fan stretched out his palms as the star-seizing palm imprint whistled out. A gigantic palm appeared in the air, grabbing towards the ancient scroll. Stay here. Zhao Lai's saber flashed with a brilliant light, as though space itself was about to be sliced apart by him. And at this instant, Zhang Chen and Hua Feng also moved, their silhouettes dashing towards the ancient scroll. Since Qin Wenyan had explained everything clearly, there was no doubt that this ancient scroll was an inheritance art. If not, if Qin Wenyan wanted to cheat them and one of them showed the scroll to the others, they would know that they had been cheated by Qin Wenyan. If that was the case, Qin Wenyan would have offended them even more. Since that was the case, they might as well not hand over the ancient scroll. Hence, there was an 80% chance that this cultivation art was real. However, at this moment, the entire space started to tremble. The golden-armored male had said that if the inheritance was obtained by someone else, this place would collapse. In the air, the statue also trembled, and with a deafening boom, it directly exploded into pieces. In that instant, the entire space was swept up by a powerful gust of wind. This training ground was on the verge of collapse. The great hall that Qin Wenyin was in was also trembling. Bai Lu inclined her head, staring at the trembling great hall as she asked, "What should we do?" "Let's go." Qin Wenyin spoke, as he flew in the opposite direction of the exit, directly blasting a hole in the great hall. Their group flickered as they sped away. The gust of wind grew stronger and stronger, and it was as though a sandstorm was sweeping over them. "This space is already collapsing, but it shouldn't be a threat to our lives." Bai Lu Jing shouted in the midst of the sandstorm, wanting to pull Bai Lu back, only to discover that the sandstorm was blowing into their eyes, causing them to be unable to open their eyes at all. Qin Wendian closed his eyes, using his perception to probe his surroundings. Abruptly, his heart trembled. "This is bad," Qin Wendian mumbled. Up in the air, it was as though a desert had swept over them, directly burying them. Their bodies moved along with the flow of the sand, and in an instant, they had no idea where they were swept to. The four of them were completely separated from each other. 3 days later, news circulated that the training ground for divine inscriptions had disappeared. The ancient city had been buried by the sandstorm. At the original location of the ancient city, there were several people gathered there, staring at the ruins of the ancient city, yet they couldn't see anything else. There was only a vast expanse of golden sand. What happened? The hearts of the crowd were filled with curiosity. It was rumored that the training ground for divine inscriptions was the Tao cultivation ground of an ascendant, and there was a high possibility that the inheritance of the ascendant could be found there. If that was the case, why would such a situation occur? Where was the training ground? And who had obtained the inheritance of the ascendant? The news gradually circulated around the moon continent, causing more and more people to gather here out of curiosity. Even those from the major powers had arrived, but at this moment, there was also news that the number 11 ranker of the heavenly fate rankings, Zhan Chen, had already returned to the Pill Emperor Hall. After which, Yang Fan from the Star-Seizing Manor, Zhao Lai from the Skyember sect, and Hua Feng from the Hua clan all returned to their respective clans and sections. And after that, there was also news that the inheritance of the ascendant had been obtained by Zhan Chen from the Pill Emperor Hall. Many people sighed in their hearts. Zhan Chen was indeed worthy of being ranked number 11 on the heavenly fate rankings, the strongest participant in the training ground. Now that he had obtained the inheritance of the ascendant, Zhan Chen's status in the Pill Emperor Hall would definitely be even higher than before. As for what exactly happened in the training ground, and why so many experts had fallen, nobody knew. But one could imagine that the training ground this time around must have been extremely intense. Bai Lu Jing and Bai Lu also returned to the White Deer Institute. Bai Lu snorted disdainfully when she heard the rumors circulating in the outside world. Among all the rumors, only Qin Wentian's name wasn't mentioned. Most probably, the news of the heavens chosen from the transcendent powers being chased out of the Great Inheritance Hall was something that no one dared to mention. Each and every heavens chosen had to rely on a grandmaster at the 3rd level of Yuanfu in order to enter the Great Inheritance Hall. And after that, they were actually chased out of the Ascendant's Great Inheritance Hall. Even the final part of the inheritance was given to Zhan Chen by a grandmaster at the 3rd level of Yuanfu. Because of this, Zhan Chen was even injured. These matters were only known by those who were directly involved in the matter. The truth might be buried in the sands of time. Because even if Bai Lu Jing and Bai Lu did it for the sake of Qin Wenyan, they wouldn't publicize this matter. Although this would allow Qin Wentian's name to resound throughout the entire moon continent, at the same time, it would also push Qin Wenyan to the teeth of the storm, becoming the target of public criticism. Don't forget, even if he gave up the inheritance, he still had another ancient tome of divine inscriptions. To grandmasters, the value of the tome left behind by the Ascendant was even more valuable compared to the cultivation art. But now, where was Qin Wentian? Bai Lu stood at the top of the pavilion, gazing into the horizons. In the ruins of the refinement grounds, beneath the billowing yellow sands, a dilapidated palace could be seen. Qin Wenyan sat cross-legged inside, with a puppet in front of him. This puppet was none other than the golden-armored king puppet. Qin Wenyan naturally knew how to refine puppets. Now that this puppet had no master, how could he waste it? After all, this was a fourth-ranked puppet. In Qin Wenyan's eyes, a puppet was a divine weapon. Refining a puppet was the same as refining a divine weapon. After a divine weapon was refined, it could be controlled by one's will. If it was a divine weapon, one could use their will to control the sword, killing enemies from 1,000 miles away. And after refining a puppet, it would also be controlled by the will of its master, unless the will of the puppet was forcefully erased by an expert from the outside. Hence, Qin Wenyan first repaired the defensive divine inscriptions of the puppet. In addition, the material used to refine this puppet had an extremely high defense. Unless it was attacked by a heavenly dipper sovereign, it would be extremely difficult to erase the defensive divine inscriptions. After all, it wasn't easy to find someone like him who could defend against the reverse divine inscriptions. After a long period of time, the golden-armored king puppet stood up. Its eyes abruptly flashed with a golden light, as though it was a golden sword, capable of piercing through the eyes of those who looked at it. A faint smile flickered in Qin Wenyan's eyes. With an intention of his will, he kept the puppet into his interspatial ring. Since this puppet was controlled by his will, he could naturally keep it in his interspatial ring. But if it was controlled by someone else, he would have to erase that person's will before he could keep it. After refining the puppet, Qin Wenyan wasn't in a hurry to leave. He closed his eyes and started to carefully sense the changes in his body. After closing his eyes, a ray of light shot out from the center of his brows. After which, a golden vertical eye appeared there. When this eye opened, everything in the outside world was imprinted into his mind, and at the same time, it was imprinted into his heart. In that instant, Qin Wenyan's heart trembled. Both of his eyes opened, and at the same time, a resplendent beam of golden light shot out from them. The beam of light swept past, penetrating through the hearts of others. There seemed to be a mandate emanating from his eyes. His eyes could actually release the willpower that he had comprehended. Chapter 274. After the incident at the secret grounds of divine inscriptions, the transcendent powers of the moon continent once again returned to their former transcendent powers. Not only that, the level of danger at the secret grounds of divine inscriptions this time around far surpassed all the previous ones. Within the secret grounds of divine inscriptions, many of the transcendent powers had fallen. According to those who survived, they only managed to walk out alive after the secret grounds of divine inscriptions had been destroyed. If not, they would have been trapped there forever. Undoubtedly, the Pill Emperor Hall had become the victor in the eyes of the crowd. Because only Zhan Qin, the chosen of the Pill Emperor Hall, had obtained the legendary inheritance of the Ascendant. This was a topic of discussion for countless people. Zhan Qin was originally ranked number 11 on the Heavenly Fate rankings, and was only one rank away from entering the top 10. After receiving the inheritance this time around, the Pill Emperor Hall had placed even more importance on him. Many people were speculating when Zhan Qin would attempt to enter the top 10 of the Heavenly Fate rankings. To Zhan Qin, the difference of a single rank was extremely important. The meaning behind the top 10 and the top 11 was completely different. In the Pill Emperor Hall, Zhan Qin didn't seem to be excited at all. In fact, there was even a hint of sorrow on his face. Zhan Qin, since your fate is already determined, don't be sad. Everything will be gone with the wind. At this moment, Zhan Qin's master consoled him. However, Qin Yu's death was all because of my incompetence. I failed to protect her. Zhan Qin sighed. After which, a cold sword light erupted forth from his eyes. Qin Yu's death, half of the responsibility lies with that Grandmaster Divine Inscriptionist. If it weren't for him, Qin Yu wouldn't have died in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions. I will personally kill that person. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. The killing intent in Zhan Qin's eyes wasn't fake at all. That was the killing intent he had towards Qin Wendian, an extremely intense killing intent. He originally wanted Qin Wendian to die. Not to mention the fact that Qin Wendian had witnessed his secret. Qin Wendian had severely injured him in the Great Hall of the Trial Grounds and thrown him out of the Great Hall. In the end, Qin Wendian had abandoned the legacy book and given it to them. Qin Wendian deserved to die. Abandon the item Qin Wendian had abandoned. He had to sacrifice half his life before he could snatch it away. Eventually, he returned to the Pill Emperor Hall safely. How could Qin Wendian not die? Since you have the heart, you will personally avenge Qin Yue. Kill this brat. Zhang Chen, as a heaven's chosen of the Pill Emperor Hall, there was naturally no need for him to worry too much about matters of revenge. Zhang Chen would definitely be able to accomplish it. Master, Martial Uncle, I still have matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first. At this moment, a beautiful maiden beside them spoke, causing Zhang Chen's gaze to land on her. Mo Qingqing, under the tutelage of her martial uncle, Luo He, had improved by leaps and bounds, regardless of cultivation or alchemy. Not only that, Mo Qingqing's martial uncle wouldn't be stingy in the slightest, as long as it was beneficial to her cultivation. Okay, you can leave first, Zhang Chen will send you off. Luo He nodded her head lightly. No need, Senior Zhang Chen still needs to cultivate, there's no need to waste time. Mo Qingqing's voice was as cold as ever, as cold as ever. After speaking, she bowed slightly to Luo He before departing alone. Bai Fei, who was following beside Mo Qingqing, cast a deep glance at Zhang Chen, her beautiful eyes flickering with a hint of emotion. Zhang Chen, the most outstanding young man in the Pill Emperor Hall below the Heavenly Dipper realm. He was always so cultured and elegant, approachable and approachable. However, Bai Fei knew that it was impossible for her and Zhang Chen to be together. In her eyes, Zhang Chen was a lofty and lofty existence, unreachable. In the past, there was Qin Yu, and now, there was Mo Qingqing. Bai Fei sighed in her heart as she chased after Mo Qingqing. Not long after, she caught up to her. Staring at the cold and beautiful back view of Mo Qingqing, Bai Fei's beautiful eyes flickered. Her lips moved, as though she wanted to say something, but in the end, no words came out. She knew that the divine inscriptionist Zhang Chen was referring to was none other than Qin Wendian. Zhang Chen wanted to kill Qin Wendian. If she were to tell Mo Qingqing that Qin Wendian had come to the moon continent, and had even entered the refinement grounds, how would Mo Qingqing react? However, she chose to remain silent. If Senior Zhang Chen killed Qin Wendian, wouldn't that mean that there would no longer be any possibility between him and Mo Qingqing? In the White Deer Institute, atop a pavilion, Bai Lu Yi stared at the lake water in front of her, her heart filled with worry. A month had already passed, but Qin Wendian had yet to return. She was worried that Qin Wendian would be in danger. You're thinking about that fellow again. At this moment, a low laughter drifted over. Bai Lu Yi turned her gaze over, rolling her eyes at her brother as she asked, "What are you talking about? You still don't want to admit it? During these few days, you haven't been to the White Deer Cavern, and you haven't even cultivated." Bai Lu Jing stared at his sister as he laughed. Even if your brother disappeared for a year and a half, you wouldn't be so worried. You're so powerful, what could possibly happen to you? Bai Lu Yi laughed. His cultivation base isn't high after all. Although he gave up on the inheritance scroll, if he really encountered those fellows, they would definitely not spare him. Are you that unconfident in him? Bai Lu Jing laughed. You're too worried. You're right, that fellow has so many methods up his sleeves. Even if they wanted to kill him, it wouldn't be so easy. A relaxed smile appeared on Bai Lu Yi's face. Although she hadn't interacted with Qin Wendian for a long time, and his cultivation base was only at the 3rd level of Yuanfu, that fellow had a unique charisma that caused people to feel that he was extraordinary. It wouldn't be so easy to deal with him. Zhang Chen, Yang Fan, Zhao Lai and the rest were all heaven's chosen, but when they fought for the inheritance, they were all chased out of the Great Hall by him. But now, our White Deer Institute is in trouble. A loathsome fellow has appeared, Bai Lu Jing stated in a depressed tone, causing Bai Lu Yi to be stunned. What happened to the White Deer Institute? You should still remember what the elders said about the White Deer Institute, right? Bailu Jing asked, his words causing Bailu Yi's heart to tremble. Of course she knew. She had even discussed this matter with Qin Wenyan back in the training grounds. Qin Wenyan had the Azure Emperor token in his hands. He was a descendant of the Azure Emperor. Of course, Bailu Yi replied. A descendant from the D clan of the Azure Emperor has arrived, announcing that he wants to take over the White Deer Institute, Bailu Jing stated, his words causing Bailu Jing's beautiful eyes to freeze. The D clan of the Azure Emperor had arrived? Not only that, they wanted to take over the White Deer Institute? How could this be possible? What about Qin Wenyan? Qin Wenyan was the possessor of the Azure Emperor's token. Not only that, other than the possessor of the Azure Emperor's token, who else would know of the hidden Azure faction? Bailu Yi suddenly felt that this matter wasn't as simple as it seemed. When did he arrive? Bailu asked. Today. Not only that, he seems to be very clear about the current situation of our White Deer Institute. He even knows about you. A helpless smile could be seen on Bailu Jing's face. With regards to the Azure faction, it was just as Qin Wenyan had guessed. Although they still followed the teachings of their ancestors, their feelings for the Azure faction had already faded. Especially so for the younger generation. Which of them didn't have any feelings for the Azure faction? He knows about me? Bailu Yi was dumbfounded. That fellow is extremely arrogant. The moment he arrived, he said that he wanted the entire White Deer Institute to listen to his commands. He said that he would take control of the White Deer Institute, and in order to compensate us, he would marry you. Bailu Jing laughed speechlessly. He already had no feelings for the Azure faction, and now that he saw such a ridiculous person, how could he have any good feelings? He only felt that it was ridiculous. Let's go take a look. Bailu Yi spoke, following Bailu Jing as they left the area, arriving at a courtyard in the White Deer Institute. There were several people gathered here, and the person in the lead wasn't an elder of the White Deer Institute. Instead, it was a young man clad in a long golden robe, exuding an aura of nobility. His countenance was filled with a faint trace of arrogance. Behind the young man, there was an old man quietly standing there, as though he didn't exist. However, it was precisely because of this that this old man was extraordinary. Upon seeing Bailu Yi walking over, the young man's gaze swept over her. Her angelic countenance, fiery figure, she gave off an intense feeling of desire. The young man's eyes abruptly brightened as he laughed. You must be Little Yi? Little Yi? Bailu Yi was dumbfounded, staring at the young man speechlessly. Even with their relationship, Qin Wenyan had never referred to her in such a manner. This was the first time they met, yet this young man referred to her as Little Yi. Who might you be? Bailu Yi asked. Di Cheng, I'm a direct descendant of the Azure faction, a direct descendant of the Azure Emperor. The young man's voice contained hints of arrogance. Bailu Yi stared at him as she asked, Do you have the Azure Emperor token? This manor was located in the central region of the White Deer Institute, and the security here was extremely tight. Only core members of the institute were allowed to enter, hence Bailu Yi didn't need to worry about her words leaking out. The Azure Emperor token is temporarily not in my hands, Di Cheng replied. He didn't expect Bailu Yi to directly ask about the Azure Emperor token. Since you don't have the Azure Emperor token, how can you talk about the inheritance of the D clan? Bailu Yi coldly replied. The Azure Emperor token is the symbol of the successor of the Azure Emperor. Bailu Yi heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that Di Cheng was unable to take out the Azure Emperor token. Although she trusted Qin Wenyan completely, the secret of the Azure faction wasn't known by many. She was afraid that if the young man could take out the Azure Emperor token, it would mean that Qin Wenyan had lied to her. However, Di Cheng was unable to take out the Azure Emperor token. This indicated that the identity of the successor was extremely suspicious. Hee. Di Cheng laughed. The Azure faction has experienced too many trials and tribulations up till now. The Azure Emperor token has yet to be found, but the Azure faction can no longer remain silent. I came here with the identity of a descendant of the D clan, hoping that the White Deer Institute will follow the teachings of our ancestors and assist me in reviving the Azure faction. Just because you say you are, it means you are? Bai Lu Yi bluntly replied. The hidden Azure faction has been hidden for many years. Only those with the Azure Emperor token would know of it. How did you know about the White Deer Institute? Chapter 275. Back then, the Azure Emperor Palace was one of the strongest powers in Grand Xia, with experts as common as the clouds. Among them, not everyone had the surname D. There were disciples, successors, and even loyal protectors and servants of the Azure Emperor. Together, they formed the Azure faction. After the destruction of the Azure Emperor Palace, those who were most loyal to the Azure Emperor silently left, concealing themselves in various locations in Grand Xia, concealing their identities and even changing their original surnames. However, they all had a single mission. If one day, there would be a person who could control the Azure Emperor Palace, that person would be the leader of the hidden factions of the Azure Emperor, allowing the Azure Emperor Palace to rise up once again. This was also the teachings of the White Deer Institute. But this wait was simply too long. For thousands of years, such a person had yet to appear. The inheritances of the hidden bloodlines grew longer and longer, and their loyalty to the Azure Emperor naturally grew weaker and weaker. Right now, the only thing binding them was the teachings of their ancestors. Since there was the Azure Emperor token, there would naturally be a person in charge of it. This person was none other than the Azure Emperor's foster son, as well as his personal disciple. He took after the Azure Emperor's surname, and his bloodline was the most direct line of descent. The mission of selecting a successor for the Azure Emperor also fell onto the shoulders of this bloodline. Maybe, this bloodline was the most loyal to the Azure Emperor. The person behind Di Cheng couldn't help but to berate, impudent. This person had been silent all this while, as though he didn't exist. But now that he had spoken, his tone was extremely imposing. Di Cheng laughed as he waved his hands. Little E is still young, there's no need to worry about it. Since you want to hear the truth, I'll tell you. Currently, the person in charge of the Azure Emperor token has been captured by the 9 Mystical Palace, and there's a possibility that they will force out the Azure Emperor token. At that time, all the hidden factions would be exposed, and the only thing waiting for you all would be destruction. This old man has also heard that only the person in charge of the Azure Emperor token would know of our whereabouts. Since you guys don't have the Azure Emperor token, how would you know? Can I understand that you have already gone against the teachings of your ancestors? At this moment, an elder from the White Deer Institute spoke. Although his tone was calm, his words were filled with sharpness and sharpness. I'll explain this to you later. Di Cheng smiled as he continued. The White Deer Institute is the first hidden faction I want to unify. I will definitely not mistreat the White Deer Institute. In the future, Little E will be my wife, and the White Deer Institute will become the leader of the Azure faction. Who said I want to be your wife? Bai Luizhen didn't expect Qin Wenyan to be so shameless, acting as though he was doing her a favor. Di Cheng's eyes brightened as he watched Qin Wentian's actions. Let's not talk about this matter for now. Young Master Di Cheng, why don't you take a rest first? An elder spoke calmly, not wanting to continue the conversation. Knowing that it was impossible to take down the White Deer Institute in one go, Di Cheng nodded in agreement. After making arrangements for Di Cheng, the White Deer Institute naturally couldn't avoid a discussion. Most of the core members of White Deer Academy were gathered within the hall. The 4 patriarchs, 9 elders, the masters of the various halls, and the outstanding juniors of the direct line of descent were gathered here. The person in the lead was none other than Bai Lu Yi's great-grandfather, the current administrator of the White Deer Institute. This old man had white hair and a white beard, but he still had the spirit of a dragon and a tiger. What's your attitude towards this matter? The old man calmly stated. I don't agree. Our White Deer Institute is already a branch of power. Why should we be controlled by others? Not only that, this person isn't even able to take out the Azure Emperor token. An elder from the White Deer Institute coldly stated. This matter needs to be discussed at length. After all, the ancestral teachings are still there. But the identity of this person is still worth investigating. I'll listen to elder brother. The last elder tapped on the armrest of his chair as he added, let's seek the opinions of the juniors. Bai Lu-yi quietly observed the attitudes of the crowd. What made her surprised was that her great-grandfather and the other elders didn't seem to agree with the idea. Not to mention the juniors, the majority of them didn't seem to agree. Thinking of Qin Wenyin, Bai Lu-yi couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed like that fellow's path wouldn't be so smooth. Little E, what's your opinion? An elder asked Bai Lu. This elder was none other than her grandfather. Bai Lu-yi pondered for a moment before replying, I don't know what the other elders think about the current White Deer Institute. Do you wish for the White Deer Institute to remain like this, hiding within the Moon continent? Or do you wish for the Azure Emperor Palace to be able to stand tall in Grand Xia one day? If it's the former, there's no need for us to discuss this further. The various elders froze for a moment before smiles appeared on their faces. We're already old, we can't even compare to little Yi's words. Bai Lu-yi's great-grandfather laughed. That's right. First of all, what's our attitude? If there's someone who can allow us to stand tall in Grand Xia with the identity of the Azure Emperor Palace, this means that the strength of the Azure Emperor Palace wouldn't lose out to any of the major powers in Grand Xia. I have no objections, an elder stated. Bai Lu-yi discovered that the majority of those who wished for the White Deer Institute to stand tall in Grand Xia with the identity of the Azure Emperor Palace. Only those who were more conservative still wished for the White Deer Institute to remain like this. Little E, you heard it yourself. Continue with your thoughts. Bai Lu-yi's great-grandfather looked at her as a gentle smile appeared on his face. Great-grandfather, it seems that everyone is unwilling to accept the current status of the White Deer Institute. Bai Lu-yi smiled. Ultimately, the Grand Xia Empire belongs to the transcendent powers. Although the White Deer Institute is extraordinary, the 4 transcendent powers of the Moon continent are still able to suppress us, the old man stated. Since we're unwilling, let's find an opportunity. Bai Lu-yi nodded. You agree to submit to Di Cheng? The white-bearded old man asked in bewilderment. No, I believe that the successor of the Azure Emperor, as well as the one with the Azure Emperor token, would definitely be someone extraordinary. A sweet smile appeared on Bai Lu-yi's face, as a bright light flickered in her eyes. Di Cheng's appearance might not be a bad thing for Qin Wenyin. At the very least, Di Cheng had shaken the peace of the White Deer Institute, causing them to have to weigh the pros and cons in their hearts. The white-bearded old man stared at Bai Lu-yi in bewilderment. Why was this last so confident in the successor of the Azure Emperor? However, Di Cheng said that the person in charge of the Azure Emperor token has been captured by the 9 Mystical Palace. In the future, the Azure Emperor token would fall into someone else's hands. Great-grandfather, do you believe his words? Bai Lu-yi asked, her words causing the old man to smile as he nodded. I don't. All right, all of you can leave now. Remember, do not mention anything about the Azure faction to outsiders. If not, don't blame the clan for treating you coldly. The old man's voice was filled with authority. This matter was too serious. If news of it leaked out, the White Deer Institute would be in grave danger. The people here were all core members of the White Deer Institute, yet he still reminded them, worried that they wouldn't be able to keep their mouths shut. Bai Lu-yi and the rest departed. After that, although the people of the White Deer Institute were as warm to Di Cheng as before, they only feigned civility. They believed that Di Cheng might really be a descendant of the Di clan, or else he wouldn't have known so many secrets. However, Di Cheng could also tell that although the people of the White Deer Institute were warm and courteous to him, they didn't have the slightest intention of supporting him. In fact, he couldn't even meet with the elders of the White Deer Institute. However, the skin of this Di Cheng was truly thick enough. He continued to stay in the White Deer Institute, pestering Bai Lu-yi from time to time. This caused the people of the White Deer Institute to suspect that even if Di Cheng was a descendant of the Di clan, would the Di clan really dare to entrust their future to such a pompous character? Until one day, another young man arrived at the White Deer Institute. Only then did the White Deer Institute realize that they were wrong. This young man was named Di Feng. This young man was completely different from the pompous Di Cheng. He was calm and steady, And although his age wasn't too far apart from Di Cheng, he exuded an air of leadership, exuding an extraordinary aura. Not only that, the strength of this young man far surpassed Di Cheng. After his arrival, Di Cheng no longer dared to claim that he was the successor of the Di clan. This made the people of the White Deer Institute understand. Di Cheng was merely a scout, while Di Feng was the true successor of the Di clan. After comparing Di Feng and Di Cheng, the people of the White Deer Institute suddenly felt that Di Feng was too outstanding. Maybe he could really lead the entire Azure faction. In the training grounds of the White Deer Institute, there were many spectators watching the two young men on the stage. These two were none other than Di Feng and Bai Lu Jing. Bai Lu Jing was at a disadvantage under Di Feng's attacks, retreating continuously. His eyes gleamed with sharpness as he stared at the young man in front of him. "You should have another name, right?" Di Feng flicked his sleeves as he smiled at Bai Lu Jing. "Brother Jing's strength is extraordinary. I'm sure you'll be able to advance a few ranks in the heavenly fate rankings." "I do indeed have another name, Emperor Azure." "Emperor Azure, Emperor Azure." Bai Lu Jing murmured as he laughed. "So it's you." Only today did I finally understand the true meaning behind the name Emperor Azure. The old men by the side also had their eyes gleaming with sharpness. This young man was none other than Emperor Azure. Emperor Azure. Bai Lu Yi also had a look of shock on her face. The person ranked number 5 on the Heavenly Fate rankings was none other than Emperor Azure. Emperor Azure, ranked number 5 on the Heavenly Fate rankings, his name shook Grand Xia. However, how many people knew that his real name was Di Feng? Emperor Azure, Azure Emperor. "So that's how it is," Bai Lu Yi's grandfather murmured. He also understood the meaning behind this name. However, even such a character like Emperor Azure hadn't obtained the Azure Emperor's inheritance or the Azure Emperor token. In truth, this was also one of Di Feng's regrets. It wasn't that he didn't have the ability, it was because of the environment he grew up in. From a young age, he was brought away by his master to roam the world, and when he returned, he was already at Yuanfu. However, Di Feng didn't care. Even if he didn't obtain the Azure Emperor token, he would still lead the Azure faction. "Little E, do you think this young man can lead the Azure faction back to glory?" Bai Lu Yi's grandfather smiled, causing Bai Lu Yi to be stunned. She suddenly had a thought. The people of the Di clan were too smart. First, they sent Di Cheng here, causing the White Deer Institute to have an extremely bad impression of him. After that, they sent the number 5 ranker, Di Feng, to appear. With such a contrast, it was very easy for people to acknowledge Di Feng. Bai Lu Yi didn't know how to reply, but at this moment, a figure walked over from afar. "Miss Yi, Qin Wenyan has returned." Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes froze for a moment before a smile appeared on her face. That fellow had finally returned. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.